Crisis actor standard, her Bilderbergers. Bilderberg Conference is a conference of world economic and political leaders that is closed to the public. Rothschilds, widespread population reduction, right? Yes?
Sorry, will you be able to share this PowerPoint with us?
Absolutely, yes. So, yes, so many. So I think there are, and it's, as we talked about it, if you wanted to, we could have gone on for another 20 minutes coming up with deeper and deeper conspiracies, right? Or different versions of the same ones. So a wide range. Some of them are spectacular and truly weird. David Icke, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with, David Icke is a British broadcaster, sports broadcaster, who became convinced that the royal family and other world leaders are all actually shape-shifting aliens who are lizards. And that the royal families of Europe that are all tied by blood, right? I mean, World War I, all of the combatants in Europe are all kin. They're all cousins, right? So they're all a family in a sense, that they are all actually shape-shifting lizards. Not believed by very many, but spectacular. There are some that are believed in nearly evergreen, right? The Kennedy assassination. There are Kennedy assassination conspiracy believers of all stripes from all different places, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Others are widespread but keyed into cultural moments, like the birther controversy. The birther controversy was very big news in the late 20-teens, will probably not be huge news 15, 20 years from now. It's not probably going to be the Kennedy assassination. There are some that never take, right? There was an argument that Obama sabotaged the Deepwater Horizon in the Gulf of Mexico to have new policies against oil use, to push solar power, But this one came up, was sampled, everyone was like, no, and then it kind of went away again, right? So this happens in this kind of life cycle of conspiracy theories. The reality, and one of the things we have to think about, and the second part we'll be talking about what we do with our students and how we talk to our students about conspiracies and how we talk to our fellow American citizens about conspiracies. One of the things we have to acknowledge as part of this conversation is that conspiracies exist. If you say that conspiracy is a group of people working together, often in secret, to advance an agenda beneficial to them, then conspiracies are literally everywhere. Every corporation that is coming up with a new rollout of the bacon double cheeseburger with Rio sauce, the 11 herbs and spices in KFC, the secret formula of Coke. What I mean is people meet in secret to do all kinds of things for their own interests. And right now, maybe less now than in the Cold War, there are people in high-rise office buildings thinking of how to protect you. The CIA, the FBI, Justice Department. There were also, certainly when I was a child in the 1980s, living outside of MacDill Air Force Base, there was someone probably not much older than me somewhere in Russia sitting on an ICBM targeted with my neighborhood, right? There are secret groups working against you and protecting you. We live in a web of secrecy. Not all of it is a conspiracy. But we have to recognize that conspiracies do exist, right? So I think that when we talk about conspiracy culture, when we talk about conspiracies, it seems like we're talking about something that's weird and strange and outside of the mainstream, outside of the way that most of us, because we all generally think of us as a group, right? Educated educators who teach people we are not part of this group, that group is out there, and this is a fringe, strange part of American culture. I disagree. I think that conspiracies is how Americans do politics. It is often the first move. When I heard yesterday, maybe you did too, that Stormy Daniels got arrested, I had conversations with no less than 5 people about it yesterday who are all of differing education levels from high school to postgraduate medical school, who all said they set her up. Who they is, why they set her up, but the first thought is they set her up, right? Right? There's a growing sense in the United States, and I'm going to trace some of these conspiracies from early on in our founding to the present day, of about this is a way that Americans do politics, think politically. And it's also part of our, and maybe other countries too. I don't know that it's just unique to America, but America's what I've studied, and it certainly is a powerful force here. The way we think about politics, whether it is Bernie was rooked out of by a conspiracy of the Clintons, or Trump saying this is a conspiracy to get me unelected, or all of these simple things, probably down to every local school board of a conspiracy to do one thing or another. Put in a street light, change the hours of the bus schedule, whatever, right? So in my own classes, I talk about the occult, right? And on one level, the occult is exactly what we tend to think of as the occult. Werewolves, demons, witches, monsters, magic, right? That is the occult. And that's part of American culture, right? I mean, certainly Salem witch trials and other places where this kind of what we tend to think of as scary supernatural beliefs come up. But I also think there's a big part of the occult in the Latin sense of occultus, of hidden, of an American fascination with hidden knowledge that shows up in our popular culture, that shows up in our advertisements, that shows up in our TV shows. This idea that Americans are haunted by, that the world is not what we see, and the real things that happen and really affect us, the important things are the things that are happening hidden underground. Hidden underground both metaphorically and quite literally, okay? That them are making the decisions. And them are somewhere hidden underground, and we have to find a way to discover what reality actually looks like, right? So occult thinking conspiratorially is how Americans react to the world, how they interact with the world. It is part of our popular culture. You can also look at, for example, if you look at just advertisements. Here are 10 ancient diet secrets that they don't want you to know. That if you watch, certainly I watched a lot of, because I didn't have a lot better things to do. I watched a lot of Oprah and daytime television during the 80s and 90s, right? Here are diet secrets. Here are beauty secrets. Here are things that your cardiologist doesn't want you to know. Here's the way to eat, and if you eat this way, you'll magically lose weight, and your cardiologist doesn't want you to know that so that you stay fat and have to come and get a heart transplant, whatever, right? But that idea of there's a secret knowledge of a way to do things, and some powerful force wants to keep you from doing that. And that is in politics, that is in culture, that's in popular culture, right? I looked through the TV listings. It is hard to find a night in TV. I would argue that you might not be able to find a night in popular culture where one of the major shows on networks is not about exactly this, right? Is not about secret groups of agents stopping underground groups. 24, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., right? Angels and Demons, X-Files comes back. X-Files was massive in the 90s, right? But again, all of these things. Buffy, the idea, I mean, again, I was joking that I was watching Downton Abbey with my wife, and I realized about 4 episodes in that something was missing, and I turned to her and I said, where are the vampires? Like, how is it that we're gonna go 4 episodes of a show, then like, no one has superpowers? Like, no, there's no like the Kaiser's not a werewolf? How is this possibly a show, right? So this is what we are obsessed by, right? And it is percolating through our culture in ways that Americans are prepared to think that there is an occult underground world. An occult not necessarily werewolves and vampires, but hidden. That's away from us, that some other people control. This came up a year ago. I showed it, and I always try to find things that are more popular, but this was so good I couldn't not use it, right? This was on Twitter. Sometimes it's a horrible mistake to let 10-year-olds name their own baseball team. Then again, sometimes they crush it. And the kid has his baseball team, Little League team, is the Illuminati. With the baseball back of the jersey being trust no one with the all-seeing Illuminati eye. I think if you would have let me name my when I was on Ken's Barbershop, which is my actual Little League team when I was 10, we would have never come up with Illuminati, right? So what does it mean to have kids name themselves after, as we'll talk about, a 1770s Enlightenment underground movement in Bohemia, and to have trust no one as the tagline? Now, partially this is from the X-Files, this is a joke, this is not serious, or is it, right? What does this say about our culture? Joseph Yasinski, who studies conspiracy theories, did a study for his 2014 book and asked, big events like wars, the current recession, and the outcomes of elections are controlled by small groups of people who are working in secret against the rest of us. We'll talk about more on this in our second hour, right? Only 30% disagree, okay? Kyrie Irving believes the earth is flat. They lie to us, right? So part of this is, I don't want to necessarily make fun of Kyrie Irving, but I wanted to read some of this, right? So this is from the Sporting News, not known as necessarily being deep into conspiracy theories, but this is the idea that the earth is truly flat and this is being hidden, okay? So the Earth is flat, Irving said matter-of-factly. Irving joins rapper B.O.B. as a notable denier of a sphere-shaped planet. Anytime you have a specific question like, quote, is the Earth flat or is the Earth round, I think you need to do research on it. I think we would all agree. When asked how he can believe the flat theory, Irving responded, because it is right in front of our faces, they lie to us. Irving also acknowledged that he has been taught his entire life that the planet is round, but thinks logically it just doesn't make sense. And now the words of Kyrie Irving, if you really think about it from a landscape, the way we travel, the way we move, and the fact that can you really think of us rotating around the sun and all planets allied, rotating in specific dates, being perpendicular with what's on with these planets and stuff like this, Irving explained using air quotes when saying the word planets. Maybe the Cavaliers don't need to acquire Carmelo Anthony at the trade deadline. Maybe they need Neil deGrasse Tyson. Ha ha ha. I am not here necessarily to make fun of Kyrie Irving, who literally states Newton's theory of planetary motion as a kind of big scam. But this quote, because it is right in front of our faces, they lie to us. Trust no one. Okay? So Stefan Diggs, from the wide receiver of the Vikings, said, well, how mad would you guys be if I said I agree with Kyrie? Well, I don't care. Someone responded, you think the Earth is flat? And he said, prove that it's not right now. Besides showing me a picture that you got from somewhere, and I'll be a believer. Now, we want to not say that we're talking with a wide receiver of the Minnesota Vikings about whether or not the Earth is flat, but look at the evidentiary argumentative moves, right? Which is, I don't believe it, they lie to us, show me a picture, but not one you got from somewhere. Because underneath that is a sense, they lie to us. The evidence itself by which we would argue about whether this is true or not is so tainted that it is not accessible. And that a circular argument in which the evidence you want to introduce will be immediately discounted because the source you're going to produce it from are the only people who could take pictures from space, who are them. We're in a box, an intellectual box. Okay? Richard Hofstadter wrote in 1964 for Harper's, so it's an article that you could give to students, and I've given to students. It's very accessible, easy to read, about the paranoid style, and I want to read a little bit. American politics has often been an arena for angry minds, but behind this I believe there's a style of mind that is far from new and that is not necessarily right-wing. I call it the paranoid style simply because no other word adequately evokes the sense of heated exaggeration, suspiciousness, and conspiratorial fantasy that I have in mind. In this essay from 1964, in the wake of Barry Goldwater and the idea of the John Birch Society, he's writing about this, but he's also going back in history and writes about conspiracy in the 1850s. This is from a Texas newspaper in the 1850s. It is a notorious fact that the monarchs of Europe and the Pope of Rome are at this very moment plotting our destruction and threatening the extinction of our political, civil, and religious institutions. We have the best reasons for believing that corruption has found its way into our executive chamber and that our executive head is tainted with the infectious venom of Catholicism. So in the 1850s, there is a worldwide conspiracy against the United States, but it's from the Pope, and it has already infected the presidency. There are many things you can probably say about Franklin Pierce, but I don't think that he was a pawn of the Pope, right? Also, communists. This is Joe McCarthy speaking in the 1950s, which is, how can we account for our present situation unless we believe that men high in this government are concerting to deliver us to disaster? This must be a product of a great conspiracy on a scale so immense as to dwarf any previous such venture in the history of man. So, not just a conspiracy, the biggest in the history of man, and that this is Eisenhower, who won World War II, is actually a secret pawn of the communists. If not Eisenhower, then certainly people high up in the White House and the Truman administration. The paranoid spokesman sees the fate of conspiracy in apocalyptic terms. He traffics in the birth and death of whole worlds, whole political orders, whole systems of human values. He is always manning the barricades of civilization. He constantly lives at a turning point. Like religious millennialists, he expresses the anxiety of those who are living through the last days, and he is sometimes disposed to set a date for the apocalypse. So he is writing about political thinkers, but as a religious historian in particular, this language really speaks out to me in the language of millennialism and apocalyptic visions. And also, when you hear people talk in American politics, they talk about a war of civilization. Everything will be over. If we don't have this, a border wall or something else, everything will be gone, will be overridden. That this kind of language of this is the election, that if this election doesn't happen, it's all over because of some dark conspiracy. Okay? The Illuminati. We go back into our history. The Illumined Ones, established in Ingolstadt, Bavaria in 1776, founded by Adam Weishaupt, probably not a real name as it translates to Adam Wisehead, a university professor, is organized to advance the goals of the Enlightenment. So the Illuminati is a real thing. It was a real organization set up for Enlightenment goals that in 1785, Karl Theodor, the leader of Bavaria, issued an edict making all secret societies illegal. Illuminati fled the country. Government seized their letters and papers and published them, basically showing that they were anti-religious. The Enlightenment was often opposed to particularly the Catholic Church, and so this was a reason to expose them. But they show up again in the 1790s in America. And an America that's involved in about to be involved in a quasi-war with France, that's between France and England as they are fighting a revolution. France is fighting a revolution and England is about to fight a war against France, and America's caught in the middle. And if you know about the election of 1800 from Hamilton, et cetera, right? Jefferson was framed as a French revolutionary who will make the streets of America run with blood, and Adams is phrased as a monarchist who will return the United States to England, right? And the Illuminati was seen as a secret force causing the French Revolution. A small group of people in Bavaria who have already been dispersed are often accused in the 1790s of being the secret force behind the French Revolution, okay? Freemasonry. This is a constant in American conspiracy theory. It comes up again and again. It established in the 18th century, but it claims an ancient connection to the Temple of Solomon. It's an international society of brotherhood with secret signs and symbols of initiation. Do you recognize any of these symbols? Right? The all-seeing eye of Freemasonry that finds its way both onto the American dollar and onto the jersey of a 10-year-old Little League player. Right? Many of these symbols, the parquet floor, the all-seeing eye, the apron, this is a part of, when you look at the language of symbols of American conspiracy theories, these symbols come up again and again, right? And Freemasons are one of those groups. They are pan-national. They are pan-cultural, in which they stretch around the world, that have secret rituals, and those rituals may be no more complicated than the Lions Club in some people's estimation, or part of a secret, radical Satanist agenda, depending on how you want to turn it. And in a sense, it's a secret society we don't know, right? This is a list of famous Masonic leaders. It could go on and on. 27 signers of the Constitution, most of the earliest presidents: Washington, Franklin, Revere, Payne, Monroe, Jackson, Polk, Garfield, McKinley, Roosevelt, Harding, Roosevelt, Johnson, Ford, others. Easy to make the argument, if you were willing to connect particular data points, that the United States government itself is a Masonic plot. Right? The reason the Great Seal looks like a Masonic symbol is that the Masons are basically behind it all. In New York in 1826, a man named William Morgan tried to join the local Mason Lodge and was turned down. So he said, "I'm going to publish a book revealing all of your secrets." He was arrested. When he was released, he never returned home. A body was found in the river in upstate New York. People thought it was Morgan, and there was a full-fledged Masonic panic that the secret society of the Masons was a murderous conspiracy that was attempting to take over the United States. And this was not just a fear that kind of percolated among Americans in upstate New York. It became an organizing principle for a political party. And the anti-Masonic party wins elections in 1832 and 1836. It elects anti-Masons to political office, and its agenda is against people in American government being parts of secret societies. Because if you're a part of a secret society, you're not doing the people's work, and your allegiance is to something else. This was the argument against Kennedy in 1960. The argument that Kennedy, as a Catholic, would have to follow the rules of the Pope rather than serve the American people. in a sense, among people, John Birchers and other people opposed to American Catholicism generally, that you could not be both a Catholic and an American president because you either served one master or the other, right? Same thing with the anti-Masons in the 1830s. But if the modern, and I'm not going to, I mean, there are other conspiracies and other things to go through. I'm going to jump ahead now. Because if the way we understand modern conspiracy theories, the way we engage them with our students and with our fellow American citizens, the way we do it now changed. It's not this. Remember, most of these so far are external things, right? The Pope is influencing us from the outside, right? Bankers are influencing us from the outside. Masons are from outside the government creeping in. Now, by the modern age we're in now, many times it's the American government itself. So if the modern conspiracy theories have a birthday, it is in 1947 with the National Security Act of 1947. It establishes the National Security Council, it established the CIA, it establishes the Air Force. The Air Force had prior been part of the Army. It established the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and it creates the CIA, as I said. It's charged with, quote, other functions and duties related to intelligence. That is boring government speak for secret operations, right? Covert ops. The budget of the Intelligence Committee was going to be a national secret. It will be a black budget, because if we let the Russians know how much we're paying for things in the security, they'll have an estimate of how much money we're spending and what we might be spending it on. But this is really important, because for the first time in American history, the federal government is saying, we are going to have a part of the government that is outside of democratic observation. We are going to have a part of the government that will do secret things that we won't tell you about, that will spend money that we will not reveal, and we will do it to protect us, because we have to have secrets to protect ourselves. And that secret state has evolved and grown and grown and involved in things like the Patriot Act, when it moves into a whole nother level after 9/11, right? But it has a birthday, 1947. Now, the idea of a secret part of the government that does covert operations in a world of the Cold War, post-World War II that we find ourselves in makes a lot of sense, right? There is a reason to have secrets. There is a reason that you might need covert actions. So it's not that this is somehow wicked on its face, but in a population that trusted the American government implicitly, this is going to be fine. If the people know they trust the government to make the right decisions with the power they give them, and they will not abuse it, then having a secret government apparatus isn't a problem. But that is not the country that we are, and it's certainly not the country we are as we move forward, right? This creates a fertile ground for conspiracies. There literally is a box where you can say, the federal government did this, and we know they have secrets and they do things. The defenses against that are, one, humans would never do that against each other. That is not a strong argument given what we know about what humans would do. It's a stronger argument in the 1940s and 50s to say the American government wouldn't do that. So when you get a conspiracy that says the American government did one thing or another, you say the American government wouldn't do that. Again, not a big deal in a society where the people reflexively trust the government. But it is a big deal, particularly for a group of people who are politically awakened by this event. Kennedy shot, not to shock you, Kennedy was shot in Dallas in November 22nd, 1963, right? Afterward, Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested. President is murdered in the middle of the Cold War. Lee Harvey Oswald is arrested. We got the guy. And then Jack Ruby jumps out of a crowd in front of a row of cameras and police officers. A minor league gangster in Dallas jumps out and shoots the person who shot the president in front of national TV. In the context of the Cold War, in the context of knowing that there is a national security state, in the context of the moving, or just about really to be moving, cultural anxieties of the 1960s. So what do? They put Earl Warren, the former governor of California and the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, in charge of the Warren Commission to investigate the Kennedy assassination. This is a bid to say, you need to trust us, because if there's one person you can trust, it is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the person who in the country is at the top of our judicial branch. He is going to be in charge of this commission, and says he acted alone, one man. The Warren Commission was not believed when it was issued. In November of 1963, 29% believed that one man did it. 52% thought others involved, and some had no opinion. As we move into the 1960s and 70s, as the lack of faith in the United States government increases, as the sense that the government does bad things goes up, as the fear of the United States government increases, that number goes up and up and up. In March 2001, it's at 81%. Did not believe. So what they are saying is, we had an investigation, the government investigated, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court came out and said, this is what happened, and at some point in 2001, more than 3/4 of the American people go, you're lying. Trust no one, they lied to us. Right? And then there are the revelations of government conspiracies that starts in the 1970s. In the Pentagon Papers in 1971, leaked documents about what the United States was doing in Vietnam. Watergate in 1972, that the president himself is about to be indicted for breaking into the offices of the DNC at the Watergate Hotel. Operation Mongoose, there's investigations, the Church Committee, the Committee on Assassinations, and what they come out with is these things that the United States government was doing. Operation Mongoose, we'll talk a little bit, was to harass Castro, working with gangsters like Sam Giancana. COINTELPRO was the counterintelligence program that's monitoring people like Martin Luther King, that was inserting government agents into leftist organizations like SNCC or the SDS. There were times in jokes that at a time there would be some civil rights or leftist meetings in which half the group was informing on the other half, because half of them were working for the NYPD and the other half were working for the FBI. Right? Following and taking pictures of King. The House Select Committee on Assassinations comes out in 1976 and raises doubts itself about the Warren Commission. We find out that the CIA helped or aided the overthrow of Iran and Guatemala. Tuskegee syphilis experiments, in which African American men in Alabama go to a clinic for their syphilis and are not treated, so that government doctors can monitor how syphilis progresses through the lifetime, because penicillin has been curing syphilis too early without telling them or their partners. Right? Iran-Contra in the 1980s, that they're moving guns to Nicaragua, to right-wing groups in Nicaragua. Project Stargate in 1995. This is the revelation that through the 1970s and 1980s, out of Fort Meade, Maryland, the DIA, CIA, it moves around, is operating a program to train psychic spies to spy and use their powers against Russia. John Ronson writes about this in The Men Who Stare at Goats, right? Project Paperclip, Clinton releases it all in 1998. Some of the documents, this is bringing Nazi scientists into the United States to work here. So we fought against the Nazis, and it's not, this again is not a revelation. As early as 1947, 1946, we knew some of this, right? That the people who designed the V2 that hit London are very soon in Huntsville, Alabama, working on the Apollo program, right? But this is Project Paperclip. We release all of not just the things about the kind of big figures that everyone knew about, but all of the rest of the Nazi, and many of them parts of the Nazi Party, who were snuck out and into the United States, right? So that argument of, well, the United States government wouldn't do this is beginning to fall apart now, too. Right? So Project Northwoods was a proposed secret plan signed by the Joint Chiefs, though canceled by Kennedy, to do a series of false attacks in the U.S. that would be blamed on Cuba to justify military action. It's made public in 1997. So in 1997, when Kennedy comes in, the Joint Chiefs say, we want to invade Cuba, we need to have a false flag operation. So the conspiracy theorists who are talking about this are not inventing it out of whole cloth. It's not like they come up with an idea that no one has ever thought of in the government. Right? Mongoose was a series of plans to harass Cuban leader and assassinate Fidel Castro. Operation Dirty Trick was a plan that if John Glenn's space capsule blew up, they were going to blame it on Cuba. So we have these plans, many of them shelved, not used, but someone's drafting them, right? MK Ultra, Rockefeller Committee first reveals that the CIA was working on mind control, attempting to use LSD to influence people to be able to question them, to make them more compliant, or to turn them into double agents if they could use them on Russians. The Church Committee hands over documents. More are handed over in 1978. They randomly drugged civilians. There was an operation called Midnight Climax, in which prostitutes The Johns coming to visit prostitutes in California and New York would be given LSD and then monitored without their knowledge to see what would happen to them. So you could live fire test LSD on subjects to see whether this was the kind of chemical that would be able to use to give to, for example, a spy in Moldova and see what would happen. Can we monitor it? Can we weaponize it, right? And all of this is coming out in the 70s and the 80s and later in the 90s. It all seems so bizarre, so sci-fi, that it undercuts something we would desperately love to be able to say. We would love to be able to say, we wouldn't do that. But it gets harder to say that, particularly to minority communities, when they come up with, when people in minority communities have a theory or an argument, and we'll talk about some of them, to say, we wouldn't do that. That's not something that the United States government would do, right? So throughout this period of revelation, one of the things that's so frustrating is that the people who were involved are not punished, right? MK Ultra doctors, CIA agents that dose people with LSD, none of them go to jail. People who were in Iran-Contra are found guilty, but then pardoned and oftentimes find their way back into the United States government, right? There's revelation without repercussions. And there's a sense that some people are above the law. That yes, the government allowed the small fish to take the fall, but what was really going on was never revealed. And that area, that dark area of we know there are secrets, we know that bad things are done, allows people to come up with conspiracies that simply expound those into new levels, oftentimes new levels of complication and horror, right? So Skull and Bones. This was established in 1832 at Yale University. It meets in a windowless room on Yale University campus called the Tomb. It picks people who are going to be successful, about 15 of men and now women every year. Have you guys heard of the Skull and Bones? Okay. So there are societies with secrets, but are they secret societies? And how do they tie into the other things we've talked about, right? So this is the Skull and Bones class of 47. This is a headline from the New York Times, which is Yale, a great nursery of spooks. One of the things you might not know about Yale is that Yale was directly connected through its membership into the OSS and later the CIA. Many of the great leaders of the CIA, many of the people that you know, number of people who are assumed to be the people on the three tramps on the grassy knoll were Yaleys, right? Cord Meyer, James Jesus Angleton, right? McGeorge Bundy, all Yaleys, some of them were Skull and Bones, some of them weren't, who later went into the OSS and then the CIA. The CIA, in 1943, 42 members of that class go on into the OSS, right? There is a statue in front of CIA headquarters who is Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale was the first spy killed by the British in the American Revolution. I regret that I have one life to give for my country. That statue that is in front of CIA headquarters is a model of another statue on Yale University campus, because Nathan Hale is Yale University class of 1773, right? Now, again, you move forward and say, but we get to 2004. You have two bonesmen. One, George W. Bush, whose father was a bonesman, whose father was also the head of the CIA, also the head of a major oil company, whose father's father, his grandfather, Prescott Bush, was also a bonesman, running against another bonesman in 2004. So now the arguments are, there's a secret society at Yale that's plugged into the American Intelligence Agency that's done, like, the guys who are sitting and writing Northwood's, you know, maybe not, but the sense is they all just came from Yale and played squash together and then said, why don't we have a false flag operation, right? I don't know that that's true, but you see the pieces are there, right? A secret society of wealthy individuals all together planning this. And this is the stuff that conspiracy theorists move. And when they were asked about it in the 2004 election, both of them refused to comment. George Bush saying something to the effect of, it is a secret society and I don't talk about secret societies, right? So it's a society with secrets, but is it a secret society, right? Another one is the Bohemian Grove. Has anyone heard of the Bohemian Grove? The Bohemian Grove is a large collection of trees in Northern California, redwood forest. It is the site of a gathering every year of political, cultural, scientific leaders who come to the forest, closed to the press, and live in the trees for 2 weeks. Now, this is can anyone identify anyone here in this picture? This is 1967 at the Bohemian Grove. Nixon on one side, Reagan on the other. The guy in the middle is Harvey Hancock. He was the campaign manager for Eisenhower and also a big executive at Pan Am. This guy to the left of Nixon is Glenn Seaborg. Glenn Seaborg has discovered 11 elements, was a professor at Cal Berkeley, was also in the Manhattan Project at UC, and also was the co-winner of the Nobel Prize in 1951. So he is a leader of, and later on, moving for peace and arms control, etc. But these are the kinds of people who are there. Now, is it a problem in America that people have a secret society at Yale and with Yale's connection to the intelligence community, is it a problem that they gather in places that are defined as secret, the Bohemian Grove, right? Is it a problem that they are there without press, meeting and chatting? Maybe, maybe not. Is it a problem that they put on robes on one of the first days and have a ceremony in front of a giant statue of an owl in which they burn a human effigy in a ceremony called the cremation of care? I mean, it's weirder, right? So we have, but so when someone who is inclined to conspiracy theories sees what the American government has actually done, sees the connections that they can draw, then sees that but wait, they're all wearing robes in front of a giant owl burning a human in effigy. It gets harder and harder. It gets to be that stuff which is, at what point is a secret society, a society with secrets, a secret society? At what level does it reach the point that we should care, or this is still like you're attempting to put something in a place where it isn't, right? John Ronson wrote a book, Them, in which the experience is that he and Alex Jones snuck into the Bohemian Grove and got this footage, okay? And it's a real question, is this a big deal at all, right? Because this is the raw material of conspiracies. This is the kinds of stuff, and the raw material for each conspiracy is going to be a little different, the pieces that they're going to mix and match to try and make a conspiracy. But we have to recognize that there is stuff, the raw material is out there for people to make conspiracies. Now that doesn't make conspiracies real, it doesn't make it work, but we need to recognize that this is the well of stuff that people are drawing from who are coming into your classrooms, right? All of this information's on YouTube. All of this stuff that when they want to make these kinds of things. These are the raw materials. And if we're going to talk about these with our students and fellow Americans, we need to know some of this history to recognize what's in bounds and what's not, right? So elements of a good conspiracy group: international scope, a state within a state helps. This is the Masons, the Catholic Church, the international banks, the maybe even some of these organizations, depending on how you want to define Bohemian Grove. It stretches beyond national borders. It has famous members. If there is a secret society in which the highest ranking member is a barber from Muncie, I don't think anyone cares, right? But when you have Reagan and Nixon in a picture, now you have my attention. Political or cultural influence, again, a conspiracy of people with no power and no influence, has limited effect. Money, secret rituals, and often sexual abuse. This is a somewhat disturbing part of a lot of these, is that you take people with robes in front of the cremation of care ceremony and you add in a little Eyes Wide Shut, right? And you begin to create something that involves itself into Comet Ping Pong, right? The pizza place that was alleged to have a pedophilia ring underneath it, right? In DC in 2016, right? Occult knowledge or connections and some kind of goal, right? If the goal of a secret society is just to get together and have a party, no one much cares, right? So a little bit about UFOs, and I know, but it's because this is a place, and one of the things we need to recognize is that conspiracies don't simply involve politics. They aren't simply about political power or connections made at Yale or the international espionage, those kinds of things, right? Or oil or just money or just those kinds of things. There is a carnival-esque period in which when you trace many of these conspiracies, they're going to move to the fantastic, the unreal, seemingly, the unbelievable, the religious, the miraculous, right? So UFOs have been with us a long time. This is the book of Ezekiel. I'm not going to read it all. This is Ezekiel seeing of wheels within wheels. Ezekiel chapter 1 that many people who believe in UFOs point to, that we've been visited for a long time. You can go and read it, and it is, if you read it in a particular jaundiced eye, or maybe unjaundiced eye, it sounds like a rocket. There's flames and spinning wheels, and it moves from side to side, and it hovers and it roars. So modern American UFO culture comes from Kenneth Arnold, a civilian pilot who claimed to see objects moving over Mount Rainier in 1947, he said they were crescent-shaped, but they skipped over like saucers. They were never saucers-shaped. They were crescent-shaped, right? Now notice, again, we will talk a little bit about how part of conspiracy thinking is there are no coincidences. This is 1947, the founding of the... Now, is that a connection? I don't think so, but in the eyes of a conspiracy theorist, I can tell you that dates and times are going to be very important and they're going to echo, right? So in 1947, a public information officer named Walter Haut issued a press release that the Air Force had recovered pieces of a flying disc near Roswell, New Mexico. Are we familiar with Roswell, right? Roswell is an almost unknown air base that no one had heard of prior to this event, and now it is possibly due mainly to the X-Files and other things. It is part of our popular culture, right? They issue a story that they'd recovered a flying disc, then they issued a retraction and said they found a weather balloon, right? But it was off and running. The Air Force investigates UFOs from 1952 to 1970 in Project Blue Book. For those of you of my generation who watched the Leonard Nimoy show, there were a number of shows investigating Project Blue Book, and this was a very hot thing in the 1970s. To analyze UFO data, Air Force investigated 12,618 cases. Most were explained, but a 701, 5.6%, remain unexplained. Okay? So what this reads in the minds of conspiracy theorists is, one, UFOs are real enough that uniformed officers of the Air Force are going place to place investigating them. And two, they are issuing a report in which they're finding some unexplained. It is not much of a step to say this is all a front for clearly men in black going from place to place and covering up UFOs, right? So the next step of alien contact is abductions, right? Betty and Barney Hill is one of the classic abduction stories. It's part of our popular culture. There's all kinds of UFO shows that are going to involve exactly these kinds of things, right? Betty and Barney Hill saw a UFO on September 19th, 1961 in New Hampshire. They see a craft in figures. They realize that their drive home, normally 4 hours, took more than 7. This is the missing time that is so much a part of UFO culture. After this encounter, Betty has a long series of nightmares and physical symptoms, right? After working with a psychiatrist, Betty and Barney claim they remember exactly what happened. A ship was taken, a ship landed, they were taken on board. They had, and if I asked you all to write down on a sheet of paper the types of medical exams that were done, everyone knows now, right? So we could say they were probed here and there, this is what it looked like. We've seen it in popular culture that this event, which seemed so fringy in the 1960s, has become literally, all of us could have a conversation about what a UFO abduction feels like or sounds like, and we've seen representations of it, right? The Greys become this popular figure, right? And they published a best-selling book in 1966 called The Interrupted Journey. So why are we talking about UFOs? Because UFOs come back into conspiracy theories about the government in very interesting ways from all kinds of groups, right? That, by the 70s, people are talking about Roswell as the smoking gun, as the UFO movement, proof the Air Force is covering up alien contact. There are release documents from a group called Majestic 12 that is alleging that there was an agreement at, pick your Air Force base, Wright-Patterson, Andrews, in which there were alliances formed between the UFOs and the United States government, right? Bill Cooper is a writer who is a really leading conspiracy voice who's now dead, but he was a leading voice about this deep conspiracy in the government. That there's a conspiracy that the government had made a deal in agreement with aliens in exchange for technology to allow aliens to kidnap and torture American people. And that the abduction movement, the UFOs, the CIA, all of this is a cover-up of a giant UFO arrangement, right? So it combines the Illuminati, the Bilderbergers, the New World Order, and other groups into a kind of super conspiracy. And this is not unusual. Underneath a lot of the conspiracies that you will discuss in class are bigger conspiracies that the students are not going to discuss because they're arguing about the evidence of one particular little bit. And it's important to recognize that these things can grow and spawn, and they involve this kind of carnivalesque stuff, right? In 1990, the Air Force said, okay, we'll release all the documents about this. It was Project Mogul. It was a high-altitude weather balloons to discover whether Moscow was doing nuclear tests, and it crashed. But do you think this helped? Right? The issuing of more things was taken in the UFO community as, look how close we're getting. They're now trying to recover the cover-up because we're about to uncover it. We're about to blow this thing wide open. And the more the government said, no, here are more documents, the more they looked at it and said, these documents are so fake. I can't believe these guys are so scared. We have them on the run. So the effort to engage with the conspiracy at this point only leads to make the conspiracy stronger as a sense of, well, we're totally justified, right? So there's other arguments, right? There are other arguments that the UFO conspiracy is a conspiracy of the Air Force. So the Air Force is putting out stories about UFOs so that when people see test aircraft in the air, they don't say, oh, that's the F-37 stealth fighter. They say it's a UFO. And so this is a cover-up to get people to believe in UFOs so they aren't paying attention to what's really going on in areas like Area 51. Area 51 is an area on a government map that no one knew about prior to conspiracy theorists saying that that is Groom Lake, where they're testing the UFOs that they got from the aliens by allowing them to abduct people and take their bodily organs, right? But have you guys heard of Area 51, right? So there's a thing that you know about that's on a government map, literally listed as Area 51, because the name is top secret, because we have a national security state that takes large parts of the United States territory and says, this is Area 51, we can't tell you what we're doing here, we can't tell you what we're spending here, but it's to keep you safe, trust us. And I understand you need to test aircrafts, and I don't have a problem with that, but as it plays into this conspiracy theory, it is the raw stuff to allow this stuff to go on, right? The other one is that the UFOs are a cover-up, because what they're really doing is they are taking people and probing them and torturing them and doing medical experiments on them or their cattle. Cattle mutilation comes in here now. But the cover-up is, rather than it being black helicopters of the United States government kidnapping people, drugging them, and torturing them to do medical experiments on them, instead, it is UFOs. So whoever's out in the cattle ranch gets mad at UFOs and not at the United States government. So yes, it's a conspiracy, but it's a conspiracy of a conspiracy hiding a bigger conspiracy. These are the mazes. These are the wheels. These are the mazes we go down, right? So again, these might seem silly, but they show how conspiracy theories expand and darken as they move forward, right? From a government covering up technology or covering up something they've seen in the sky to the wholesale torture of Americans, right? Oftentimes these things will move in a religious way. That this plot of the UFOs, that the UFOs are not aliens from Andromeda, but that they are in fact Luciferian beings, right? That religion is going to come involved in some of these conspiracies, and it's going to be very common depending on which conspiracies we're looking at, right? So, journalist Michael Kelly argued in 1995 for what he called fusion paranoia. It was a union of the radical left and right, which are often seen as very distinct groups, but a union of them in the shared fear of one thing above all, the boundless, Kabbalistic evil of the government and its allies. That as you go to the left and the right, you find that the villains become the same, and it's quite often the US government. So that what we think of, there had been leftist movements like the Weathermen. There were leftist movements, the Red Army faction in Europe. But there are also the growth of right-wing movements, patriot movements, militias, the Order, Aryan Nations, Posse Comitatus. Both of these groups could get together and agree on nothing about the political outcomes they want. But they both agree that the target that they've chosen is the United States government. That it is oppressing both the rights of African Americans, whether you want to look at Philadelphia and the battle in downtown Philadelphia, or you want to look at right-wing movements in Idaho. They are all identifying the exact same enemy. That is the national security state and all of the conspiracies of the federal government, right? In 1991, George H.W. Bush, bonesman, Yalesman, former head of the CIA, comes forward and gives a speech about the New World Order. Many people who heard that said, well, that makes sense. The Soviet Union has just fallen. We have had a 50-plus year Cold War in which we split the world between communist and capitalist. Now one of those is gone. It is time to remake the world, and the new phrase, a new world order, seems utterly unremarkable. I can guarantee you, for other people listening with different ears, the Bonesman H.W. Bush, former director of the CIA, declaring a new world order is a message to his Skull and Bones alumni in the secret brotherhood, right? For these people, Ruby Ridge, which was Randy Weaver in Idaho getting delivered a warrant, the FBI and other agencies were attempting to use him as a witness or as a source against the Aryan nations. He didn't want to. They were going to arrest him on gun charges. And it turned into an armed standoff in which his wife and other members of his family are killed. Waco in 1993, the standoff in Waco, Texas for 51 days around the Branch Davidian compound, again, combining the federal government, religious believers, the Branch Davidians, who have an end-of-the-world message about the coming apocalypse, like many American religions, including the one I was brought up into, Southern Baptists, had this belief, and the federal government then rolls in, acting the role of the government that they would see them play in the book of Revelation, that turns into a 51-day standoff and ends in mass death and an invasion by an incursion into the FBI and ATF, saying this has gone on long enough, that turns into a fireball that ends up killing lots of people, right? All of these things in the context of the national security state, of UFOs, of the American government that's hiding it, of both left and right seeing the American government as the fault, as the problem, the revelations of the 1970s and the 1980s, and now the declaration of a new world order, a standoff in Ruby Ridge, are they coming for our guns, a standoff against religious people in the Branch Davidians who are a compound, again, that you have accusations of sex and religious radicalism, and now surrounded by the United States government that ends in a fireball, the sense that this is a natural first step to suppress and exterminate the American people. And there might be a lot of different versions of exactly what the conspiracy are. Which of this melange of Lego pieces of conspiracy I've laid out for you, how they're putting them together, but they all come to some similar conclusions of the fault of the United States government. Trust no one, they lie to us. And it ends in Oklahoma City. Well, it doesn't end, it's a Timothy McVeigh is at Waco. There's footage of him selling stickers, anti-governmental stickers, on the back of his car watching Waco. And when he blows this up, and Ed knows this as well as anybody, right? He makes a statement that he is a war, that the United States government has declared war in 1991 in Ruby Ridge, 1993 at Waco, and this is the next act. That he sees this as pushing back against a federal government out of control that is part of a long, detailed, oftentimes anti-Semitic, Aryan nations conspiracy theory about what has happened to the United States government. Pick your pieces from the Lego box of Masons, Jewish bankers, and put them together. But this event is coming out of that conspiracy theories, right? And coming out of the actions of the United States government that have allowed these conspiracy theories in many ways to, and not to fault them, right? Understanding, maintaining a secret state, a national security state and intelligence organizations is allowing a lot of these claims to be made. And also the actions of the things that were done in MK Ultra and Northwoods and these other things that are coming out makes it harder and harder to make the case we'd love to make, which is we would never do that, right? So this is Gore Vidal. He is on the left. He's a longtime leftist critic of American empires, he said. And he wrote about the shredding of the Bill of Rights. He declared Vicky and Sam Weaver, shot at Ruby Ridge, as victims of, quote, cold-blooded federal murder, and the Waco fire as, quote, FBI slaughter of the innocents. He wrote that, quote, most of today's actual terrorists can be found within our own governments, federal, state, and municipal. I'm not sure if you would say that post 9/11. It seems like a strange thing to say. But it does tell you where Gore Vidal is as far politically as Timothy McVeigh could be, right? He's friend of the Kennedys, like deep within the Democratic structure, but is also a critic of the United States, and they become pen pals when Timothy McVeigh is in prison. And in their letters, they correspond on how much they have in common in their beliefs, right? And this is tying into 9/11 being an inside job, right? It is unsurprising given what I've laid out, all of the pieces in the Lego box that are there for our students or fellow Americans when they go searching on YouTube or they watch a show or hear a talk. These are the things they're putting together, and they come to the conclusion that this is an inside job. This is 4 years after the revolution that they had actually discussed a false flag operation in Project Northwoods that they never did. But the claim that Bush knew echoes claims that FDR was behind the Pearl Harbor attack, that he so wanted to get involved in war in Europe that he either allowed Pearl Harbor to have or actually took a stronger hand in it in a even harder to prove conspiracy, right? So many of these claims about 9/11, and Noah will get into them in much more detail, that there were planted explosives, that there was no plane that hit the Pentagon, moving to levels of Luciferianism, that these were actually missiles and not planes with holographic planes around them, depending on how far you want to stretch the kind of unreality and the bounds of reality that they're going to use. But these are important issues and part of a debate, right? The debate about 9/11, and Noah can talk about it, part of it is evidence, and depending on who you're talking to, they might just be having an evidential debate. What would it take? How does a building collapse? Will steel melt? These kinds of things. But there are some people for whom that debate about the evidentiary basis of 9/11 or any one of these is a cover for a deeper anxiety. The anxiety of they lie to us, trust no one. And that the conversation about 9/11 is only the tip of an iceberg of all of this other stuff that's behind it, of how we think about democracy, how we think about how the American government works, and our relationship to it. This is all for the first part, and we'll move to the second part after the break. But we can have some questions if you'd like. Do you want to do? I think they need you to have a mic. Don't panic.
You'll hold it.
Don't panic.
Okay. Do you? Oh, this is weird. Okay. Do you see a difference between the conspiracy theories that, from what I can tell, seem to be very much like white men distrusting other white men, and the well-founded distrust that many communities of color have for a government that has, consistently oppressed and killed them over and over again? Is there a huge
I think you're absolutely right, and I would advise you to stay tuned for the next hour. So yes, we're going to talk about it, right? There are, that the claim that we're going to talk about how conspiracies break down racially and the types of conspiracies there are. But absolutely, given the long history of what American government and Americans in power in white society, right, slavery.
So is it a white American male phenomenon, I guess I'm wondering?
I think that's a great question. No, so I think, but what I would like to say is, I would like to address that question in the next hour.
Okay.
But let me say that had I not thought of that question, it would be a truly devastating great question. But yes, so yeah. Yes?
Sorry. To what extent is this solely an American phenomenon? Like, can you speak to if this exists internationally at all?
I can try to. I think it is. I don't think it is an American phenomenon. I think if you look at other governments, particularly the Soviet Union and communists, were rife with conspiracies. When you have I think any place you have a government that is not responsive, or secret parts of the government in which how the function of political governments and political economy isn't clear, I think you have conspiracies. I think even in a little league, in a fantasy football league, you have conspiracies where someone's like, well, I can't believe they want to switch to PPR. There's a conspiracy, right? So I think it's partially naturally in us. I also think that one of the things that make it, and again, I'm talking without evidence, so I'm just so recognize that all of this could be revised by better scholarship. I think one of the things that makes us particularly rife post-1947 is the massive power of the United States. Like we talked about, a great conspiracy matters. You have important people and a lot of money. America has a lot of money and huge power and the ability to power project in ways that if you were, say, Sweden or Lithuania or Belize, if Belize has a lot of horrible ideas, I'm not sure that they're having a whole lot of effect. But America has a worldwide empire. And again, I'm not to call it an empire, but we are in, 100 countries? We have military bases around the world. We have nearly unlimited capital. Economic system flows right through the city of New York. We have the most powerful, biggest, most expensive military in the world. We have satellites. We went to the moon. If there is a country, with the possible exception of the Soviet Union, that has the power to do bad things if it is inclined to do bad things, it's the United States. So the fact that America has confessed to doing some bad things, and it has the means and the opportunity, right? Again, if Belize says we have a plot for worldwide domination, I'm not sure where that goes other than, wow, some of the people in Belize are really messed up. But if Belize had a worldwide power projection possibility, then those conspiracies can get a lot more. I mean, there are, at Weather Mountain or the Greenbrier or Cheyenne, there are giant underground complexes that are dug that are bomb-proof. We have an entire infrastructure that was designed to accept the fact that we were probably going to be in a nuclear war. We have laws drawn up that allow certain parts of the government to be completely non-democratic, which in the eyes of some people are like, well, see, we already have the plan. All we have to do is announce a national emergency and we can dissolve this or do this or do this. Plans that were made up in the middle of the Cold War. So America is in a position, because of its power and its extent and its reach, that those conspiracies can be truly scary in the way that conspiracies about other places might not be. But I do think that, if having been a teenager, anytime you get 3 people together, 2 of them are plotting against the third one. That might be unfair, but I think, so conspiracy is not that rare, yeah.
In recent years, it feels like there's more.
Hold a second. Oh.
In recent years, it feels like there's more and more of a conversation about how people are only reading news that supports what they already think,
Sure.
and people are looking for information that's already supporting what their mindset is. So because I'm not a believer in conspiracy theories at all, but I'm looking at this and I'm like, sure, if you're trying to prove there's a conspiracy, you can always find that one detail where you're like, well, this part hasn't been solved.
Right.
Whereas there are a lot of people who'd be like, yeah, because it's nothing.
Yes.
Other people are looking for that and they're always going to gravitate towards that. Is that a part of it? But then also, to what extent is it people not taking responsibility for other actions that are happening? We're not going to say that this is what's really happening, so we're going to and we don't want to admit to what might be the problem. And
Sure.
we're just going to go with the conspiracy because that's easier than thinking what actually might be a problem and addressing it.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. And I think, again, we're going to talk about this in the second half, which is that what is the attractive part of conspiracy theories? What is the, right? I mean, a conspiracy theory isn't simply just, it's very seldom the best answer for the given evidence, right? So there's other things going on. What is emotionally attractive about conspiracies? What is politically attractive about conspiracies? And you're right. I mean, the part of it is the world's super complicated, and we want to have answers for it. And there are times in which, because of that complex nature, conspiracy theories seem easier and more attractive because they explain more things. But we're going to talk a whole lot more about that. But I do also think that the division of news, in which you consume only that news which seems to most agree with what you believe, leads to a lack of contrary opinions and examples. So I think that's absolutely true. Yeah, please.
Yes, you've been talking about conspiracy theories that people have about government.
Yeah.
But in this administration, it's they are the ones promoting some conspiracy theories.
Yes.
Like the birther movement. Trump also mentioned Ted Cruz, his dad, being involved in the JFK assassination. Michael Flynn and the pizza,
Sure.
Hillary Clinton.
Oh,
and so many others.
Yeah,
and that is extremely scary that some of the followers, because Trump has a lot of supporters, might actually believe those conspiracy theories because they're coming from him.
No, I think you're right. If you look at Comet Ping Pong, right, a guy shows up at a rifle. We could talk about it if you wanted to in some detail about the imagery and the way symbolism is used there. But I think there's no way around one of the things that achieved political takeoff for Donald Trump was his opposition to Obama and pushing birtherism, right? I mean, he is attached to that early on as a kind of, and I don't think it's the only reason he won, but it certainly was a reason. I would actually say that part of this is I think that many times, and we've talked about this in various ways, we see conspiracies as weird, separate, apart from the way people think about stuff. And I think Trump, to his credit, said, there's a lot of people who think like me, or there's a lot of people who think like this, and I can motivate them and mobilize them to become active political participants in a way that other politicians would think, well, I won't ever talk about that because it's horrible or untrue, or no one's going to respond to that, or people will think I'm a nut. And I think Trump didn't have that opinion, right? Hustle over.
I have a very quick question, then
Sure.
a longer one. Quick one is, building off of Rick's question from earlier, are you going to talk about the role of women in conspiracy movements?
A little bit. There is, surprisingly, if you look at the most of the scholarship of it, women, there's some scholarship on conspiracy belief among women, but much less on conspiracy perpetuation among women. And most of the, perhaps not surprising, it's very masculinist and in fact anti-feminist. And so, in fact, depending on which conspiracy you're looking at, things like the feminist movement of the 1960s is seen as one of the things that they are acting against, particularly in Aryan nations and Posse Comitatus, and a lot of these right-wing movements are very much about traditional female values. And so there isn't really a space for them to be the kind of engineers of but you know, there's not a lot of work on, there's a lot of work on women in radical movements or women in extreme movements, but much less on women as leaders of those movements.
Well, why? Like, why do you think they're not involved in conspiracy? Because I agree. I think I almost never think of women.
Right.
I always think of men being like, oh, well, this is all a conspiracy.
Yeah,
Like,
sure, you're right.
It's just not.
So, but I will say that that's not entirely true, because in some, depending on what community you're looking at, in some groups, to the degree that religion is an important factor. For example, Randy Weaver's wife had visions of an apocalypse, had visions of going to a mountain, and that she was really the religious, she was in some ways the leader of the family all the way around, and they moved to Idaho because they thought the apocalypse was coming. So where religion comes into this, there very often is a powerful woman figure on that, though there's also a very much a masculinist, depending on which group we're talking about, masculinist warrior culture that puts women into the background on that. Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, there is. I mean, there certainly is. Though we don't, I mean, Phyllis Schlafly probably is a conspiracy theorist, but I think we don't tend to think of her as that. But there are women, Eagle Forum and these kinds of places, that are pushing some of these things. So I think it's right. But you're right. But they certainly is, I can say that in the literature they play a perhaps very much undeserved small role that I think they deserve a lot more attention. You have a second question?
Yeah, so I was thinking about, so when you were talking about like how like the people, like the power of the United States like engenders conspiracy theories, that I was thinking about like North Korea and how the entire population is like brainwashed to believe that like they're the most absolutely powerful nation in the world and they're perfect, and like everyone else is like this horrible person in this like screwed up place. But you don't really have conspiracy theories there.
I mean, it's hard to know, right? We don't know, but it's a great question. There is also, I think what you have there is a cult of personality, but you also have the idea that Kim played a round of golf and had 18 hole-in-ones, right? Or when he was born, like there was a double eclipse and 5 rainbows. Like so there is that kind of myth building that I don't know that I would quite do. Like I don't know that it's quite a conspiracy, but it is interesting to think about what in those closed communities that are dominated by a cult of personality, the kinds of things you have.
So is brainwashing the solution to no conspiracy theories?
Yeah. Do you have a question?
You showed that they've been around forever, but I was just wondering, have they kind of changed and morphed and grown since the advent of the internet and people to be able to communicate instantaneously and around the world with each other?
It's a really interesting question, right? That there are the kind of techno prophets who say that once we'll all be able to talk to each other, we're going to move to this new level of intelligent discourse. And then there's the internet, which is not that. So I think the internet has been key to this. I mean, again, if we looked at, say, Comet Ping Pong, which starts on a Reddit board in November 4th, and within a week it's become on TV, on Fox News, talking about this event, this thing, in which there's this allegation that there's a pedophilia ring underneath this pizza place in DC, frequented by powerful politicians, particularly Democrats, linked to John Podesta's emails being leaked, in which they talk about pizza. Because my sense is, if you have a bunch of political volunteers, you buy them a lot of pizza. But people on the internet going through, he's saying pizza so much, you know that pizza is code for pedophilic sex with children. And that's what they're talking about. So I mean, so the internet allows that community, that idea, which is, what it allows is one person or a group of people have an idea, and it might be a joke, like it might be just for the lulz, it might be just like they're playing a joke on somebody, but they started into the internet, which now can spread so rapidly that everyone who has an inclination about that or an interest in that can now be part of that community. And it spreads to the point that, again, less than a month later, on November 3rd, my guess is outside of a 6-block area at Comet Ping, around the pizza place, no one's ever heard of this place, right? But it turns into the idea that all these businesses are linked, and there's this pedophilic symbolism that's showing that, and there's underground tunnels, and all of this is put together, and there's children in cages underground being kept so that powerful politicians can have, and the elite can have sex with children. And it gets to a guy in North Carolina who I guarantee you a month earlier has never heard of Comet Ping Pong. And he gets an AR-15 type rifle, and he drives to do what he called self-investigation, and walks into the restaurant and shoots into the floor and gets arrested. I mean, that kind of speed in which something can go from literally not existing, not just popularizing a conspiracy theory, but literally not existing and being created on the internet by the activity of people who are putting in, some of them are, there's a picture of Obama at Comet Ping Pong in which he's at a, first of all, isn't actually, maybe he's actually holding a ping pong paddle, but it's in like the north part of the White House, like the red carpet with a ping pong table in the middle. But it says Obama at Comet Ping Pong. I mean, I don't know who believes that. It might be someone makes it as a joke and passes it to a friend who then puts it on this, Reddit page, and then it's in the kind of, it's a new kind of conspiracy disease vector in the kind of mind of the body politic. So I think we'll talk about it some more, but I think you're right. I mean, the internet certainly has allowed communities that otherwise communicated much more slowly to communicate much more rapidly and evolve much faster in a way that's kind of surprising and shocking. I mean, I unfortunately spend more time engaging with people on the internet that I definitely don't want to meet in real life. But it's shocking how fast these things can metastasize. So, yeah.
One more question before break.
Okay. So, going to what you just said, and also, something that struck me as you were talking about the history of the Illuminati and the breakup of the Illuminati, and how there becomes this evidence, kind of how they gather evidence and create argument toward the argument that they want to make. Which made me think of the idea that, in a conspiracy situation, that there is no trusted source then, because, like you said, your source is contaminated by people who want you to see, or what they want you to see. Which really led me to kind of the modern era of kind of, you have your truth, you have your facts, I have my truth, I have my facts, and kind of made me wonder if a lot of this comes down to like just the idea that beliefs don't need proof. Because you have what you believe and I have what I believe.
Right. I mean, so we're in. I mean, imagine if we go back to Stefan Diggs, right, who is an unusual person to put in. Let's have an evidentiary argument about how we think of knowledge, and let's turn to Stefan Diggs, wide receiver of the Vikings. But the idea is, you can go ahead and prove it to me right now, but don't give me a picture that you got from somewhere because they lied to us. Right? What we're in is this weird evidentiary space in which technology has made it, even pre-Photoshop, the idea that the evidence you're giving me is fake because I have decided that NASA is a front to fake the moon landing. So the pictures you're giving me as evidence can't work as evidence because I've already decided that because they are part of the conspiracy, none of that evidence can be trusted. So there is no evidence. And I think we're at a point now, I was an English major as well, undergrad, and we talked about postmodernism and moving past truth. And the idea was that this was going to be really great because we were overthrowing master narratives of kind of, inherent ideas of gender or power or capitalism or these kinds of things, and we would be free out of these master narratives, and we'd be in a post where the powerful wouldn't be able to control the narratives. Well, we're here. So this is what it looks like, right? I mean, in an area where you say, how do we engage and talk about these issues when we won't share a worldview of what counts as evidence? And when we're in an area, and again, this is where it moves towards religion, right? You would never say to someone, and I grew up and I say, I believe the Lord Jesus died for my sins. You're like, well, give me that evidence. Right? There are some claims that are safe in our culture away from evidentiary claims. We're not going to have that argument, right? Or maybe we will, but it's going to be uncomfortable. But that sense of belief has moved in many cases beyond what we would think of as traditionally religious questions. But I would also argue from some of this, many of arguments about conspiracies are religious questions. They function like religious questions, not like political questions. And that can put us in a really gray area as we try to debate them. Does that make sense? Yeah, so we'll talk about it more. So,
Steve, thank you.
Thank you.
Indiana University Bloomington professor Stephen Andrews teaches a class about conspiracy culture in modern American society. He looks at the history of conspiracies and why people believe, for example, the Earth is flat, or the moon landing was faked, or that the 9/11 terrorist attack was a government action. This 90-minute class is from American History TV's Lectures in History series, a weekly presentation on the weekends.
All right, so one of the things is we got the conspiracy believers. We talked about the what of conspiracies. What do they believe, right? But now we also want to talk about the why and how they believe. How does this conspiracy belief work in the ground? Who are the people we're talking about? What do they look like? What are the communities like? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. So many, if not all of our students are going to come in with conspiracy beliefs. If you have had a conversation with any of your students. Now, one of the things is that people recognize that these beliefs should not be spoken of quite often. And so you would give, for example, a lesson on 9/11 in which you would have a class of 30 students, perhaps, go through a class, go out, and as soon as they get out, they're going to turn to each other and go, you know it was an inside job. But not necessarily bring that up in class, depending on your class environment and your class atmosphere. I can tell you that when I go and I sit down on a plane and I tell somebody that I'm a historian, they tend to want to talk about the Civil War, which I teach the Civil War, that's great. If I tell them that I work on conspiracies, the floodgates are open to all kinds of circus show that can come out, right? All kinds of things, from the very banal to the highly and disturbingly specific, right? So it's important to think about how these things work, how widespread they are, where they are, what causes people to hold on to them. Because if we see this only as part of not us, something we don't address, something we don't talk about, then it changes how we see these beliefs. And I also think that in a conversation, and Cliff, who was here, said he had a conversation with high school teenagers. And these high school students brought up conspiracy theories, and he had a really engaged conversation with them that they really had ideas about evidence and causality and politics that he got to where they actually are. I know that in many of the cases, I teach a class called, several classes that kind of touch on this, one called Occult America. And I can tell you that in my class of H105, when I talk about American history, and I talk about Jackson's Bank War, my students don't care. They'll learn it because I'm going to ask them about it. But emotionally, the thought of wildcat banking in Kentucky in the 1820s doesn't mean anything to them. Bimetallism, will we be crucified on a cross of gold? They're not really that concerned, right? When we talk about these issues, we get underneath to what people actually believe about how the world works. And it's hard and it's difficult and it can be moving a lot of sideways directions. But to not do it, I will try to make the case, means that we're avoiding something that they actually are engaged in, a way they actually think the world works, right? So part of this, Michael Shermer is a well-known skeptic who is a debunker of all kinds of different, fringe theories, paranormal stuff. And he says his goal is to figure out why people believe weird things. There's a real problem with this, because we have to decide what are weird things, okay? When I say a conspiracy theorist, who do you imagine? If you were an ad exec who had to market to this demo, who is your demo? You have some ideas. So we had talked a little bit. So who is it? Speak just from your heart, your gut. What does a conspiracy theorist look like, or who are they? Give me some stuff, demography.
I don't want to stereotype.
I really want you to.
I just
But
interested in the connection between the level of education that a person has.
So-
I would say the more education one has, but also the level if you a group that's been targeted as one of the conspiracists.
yes. So in other words, you are far more nice and politically kind and savvy than I want you. So you would say lower education level for conspiracy theorists?
My question would be, is the person of a lower education level, but also if you're one of the groups that's been targeted throughout history as being one of the
Sure.
conspirators,
So more likely
you're not
to be a
necessarily
minority group.
likely to believe that you're a conspiracy theory because you're well, I'm not involved in the conspiracy. Why would that even be?
Right. Okay. All right. Yeah. So we got to come.
Well, not to just say race or religion or whatever, but people who feel wronged, people who feel like something and have evidence
Right.
that they've been, mistreated
Right.
or wronged in some way, and that goes.
So what does
to,
that person look like?
Well, that
so when
goes.
when I go, I ran into this guy on a plane, and he was and they were a conspiracy theorist.
Well, that could be poor, white, maybe people who see people dying from the opiate epidemic, people who don't have enough money to.
Poor white. Okay. You're very, very nice. So I say she won't be nice.
White, male, cisgendered, straight, Midwestern between the ages of 25 and 35, single.
Where do they live?
What?
Where do they live?
In a rural area.
In a rural area, but
Yeah.
where is their bed? Their mom's basement, right? I have to tell you what. Look, on behalf of every conspiracy theorist that I have talked to, they are all very grateful that you are very nice about the stereotype. But we know the stereotype, right? Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't that sort of a thing after Charlottesville, and everyone came out and they were oh, so many people said this isn't who we were expecting to be fighting against whatever. People were shocked at the groups of people that were emerging because it wasn't what they expected.
Because they were khaki wearing white button down Oxford wearing guys with short hair
Right,
and
I think
jobs.
it sort of opened up this maybe this image of what we think the conspiracy theorist looks is not what they look like.
You guys are doing my job. I appreciate, again, she's not a shill, but she might as well be, which is exactly when we talk about conspiracy theories, and you're right, we should open it up, we should recognize it's not everybody, but there is, it's this, right? Right? It's a male, possibly politically, where do you think they are? Right. So this is the image. A right-wing male who's single, without a family, lives in his the real stereotype, lives in his parents' basement, is on the internet, right? I mean, like Donald Trump said, we don't know whether it was Russia or some 300-pound guy in his basement, right? So he is tapping into what is a cultural stereotype of what a conspiracy theorist looks like, right? But we should think about, and you guys are already well down this path of thinking this might be leading us into some places we might not want to go, that because it may not be accurate, we need to think about it much more, right? So it's important to place any of the 9/11 truth, or other words, into a broader system of beliefs about how the world works, right? It is often misleading to examine a single conspiracy separate from a network of ideas. So what do I mean? I think if you say, there's Bob, he believes the moon landing was a hoax, and you want to argue with Bob about the moon landing, it may be that that's the only conspiracy theory Bob has. But my guess is if Bob thinks that the government has rigged a fake moon landing, he didn't think, and then they were done, and let's go back to participatory democracy, right? Like, we've done our moon landing thing, now let's go back and be, you know, like subject to the rule of the voters, right? So these are networks of ideas, right? They're part of a separate system of American beliefs of what is possible in and of itself. What are the boundaries of reality? What are the boundaries of the possible, okay? So, I mean, in a sense, you can say, depending on where you set those boundaries, you have a very different idea of what is possible. So I have given you, and this is a real difficulty, right? We don't know how to know what we all believe. In a sense, to the degree that we can know what everyone else around us believes, it's hard, it's difficult. So we have questionnaires. Now, these are questionnaires that are not always reliable, but they should give us some answer of what are the kinds of beliefs that are out there in American society. First one I want to ask about, a 2007 Pew poll of 35,000 people, very well respected in a major survey, okay? So this was a big survey by Pew. There's another one that's going to come out, 35,000 people, very good numbers, nationwide, accounted for race and ethnicity, a very good survey, right? So what percentage of Americans believe in God or a universal spirit? Just give me a number. 80. 75. Well, let's say 80, 75, 60, 85, 90. So we've gone to 60 to 90. Most people tend to be in the 70s? Okay, 70s. Believe that God is a person with whom you can have a relationship. So in other words, what we're doing here is moving away from those people who say God is in nature or gravity or some other force to someone that I can pray to and have a relationship. Yeah. 60, 40. What else? 80. Okay. So but that number is lower than your number that believes in God or universal spirit.
Yes.
I said same.
Okay, all right. Believe in life after death? 80. 80. 75. How about believe in heaven? 70. 50. What, 51? 31. Anyone below 31? Anyone above 80? Wait, you have 90? How about believe in hell? Is everyone's belief in hell below belief in heaven? Because we're all no? You have it flipped? What are your two numbers? 50, 60, okay? Believe that Scripture is the Word of God. 40, 60. Okay. How about believe that miracles still occur today as in ancient times, which is both they occurred in ancient times and they occur today, right? So there's two parts. What? 20? 40. 85, okay. What? 75? 75, 80, so, right. How about believe that angels and demons are active in the world? 30? 30? 35? 85.
Who's on Oprah?
Okay. All right. So here are some actual numbers. 92% of Americans believe in God or a universal spirit. Even 21% of agnostics or atheists believe. 60% believe that God is a person with whom you can have a relationship. 74% believe in life after death. 74% believe in heaven. 59% believe in hell. We are Americans, right? So I think the Americans tend to be more charitable in the idea that they all want to go to heaven and they're scared of hell. They were not raised in my church, by the way. 63% believe that Scripture is the Word of God. Is this more religious than many of you imagined? Yeah.
I noticed the poll says 2007.
Yes.
I'd be curious to see what it is in 2018.
Yeah, no, I think they'll do it. They did it every 10 years, so I haven't seen the new numbers yet.
It could be a real trend
You think?
in the United States away from.
Yeah, so the question is,
There's a real difference between believing in religion
yes.
and attending church.
No, yeah, this is not, certainly,
I think
I think there's a growth in atheists.
yeah, no, that's, there absolutely is a growth in the unchurched, right? Number of people who, that's right. So, but this is not about church membership. That's a whole different set of numbers. But yes, but there are people who describe themselves as spiritual, but not as denominational, right? So here's the other numbers. 79% believe that miracles still occur today as in ancient times. 68% believe that angels and demons are active in the world. So first of all, I was raised in a church in which this is 100% the belief, right? So I was raised in an idea that as a kid who sat during Pastor Beamer's sermons and read the book of Revelation over and over again, right? A demon-filled world is not that strange. But 70% of Americans believe in angels and demons. That might match with some of you, but it's way higher than others. So if we live in a world with our fellow American citizens, and 70% of them believe that demons are active in the world, then where do we say, what are the weird things? Right? If we live in a world where you can say, well, such and such number of percentage of Americans said this thing that you go, well, I can't believe it. And then the newscaster said, but remember, 70% of us believe in demons. You suddenly go like, well, okay. So in other words, oftentimes this is not the world that American historians teach to. We don't teach to a world in which we think of a world of Enlightenment scholars who are only looking at rational evidence. But 70% of us, if we take this number at all legitimate, maybe it's less, but what number of people believing in demons is high enough that you have to say, when we're talking about evidentiary discussions, we might not be talking about the world we think of, right? Believe that houses can be haunted? 55. 60. The funny thing is, I'll give you the numbers in the interest of time, right? So 37% of Americans believe houses can be haunted. I will tell you that when I ask my students, they spike the graph on haunted houses. For some reason, the group of 18 to 21 are 100% down for haunted houses, right? 25% in astrology, and this is a 2005 Gallup survey. I'd like to see it. It's not as big as the other one, so the numbers might have some more fungibility. 24% that extraterrestrial beings have visited Earth at some time in the past. 21% that people can hear from or communicate mentally with someone who has died. 21% believe in witches. My sense is that this is not Wiccans in the idea that there are people who are practicing witches, but actually witches in the Salem cavorting with the dark arts sense. But remember, popular culture is absolutely full of this to the brim. In a sense that we say it's fiction, but clearly it's having an effect, or maybe that's not what it is. It's long-standing folk beliefs or whatever. But we're talking about a world in which 40% believe in haunted houses, 70% believe in angels and demons, right? It is hard at some point that I've said in a previous talk in a different context, it's hard not to think that we are living in a medieval world with high-speed internet, right? That we want to think that like these things don't exist because we are in a modern world and we have rockets. Well, yes, we have rockets, and we've invented the internet, which is a magical device that puts all of human knowledge at our fingertips, and we can share it worldwide with a single touch of a single button. And what I want to send out it is my experience with a demon, right? That the experiences we have, the world that we actually live in, our fellow Americans, maybe not people in this room, maybe people in this room, is a much more mystical-filled world than we want to often think of when we're talking about engaging with other people, right? Nearly half believe that it was very likely or somewhat likely the U.S. Air Force is withholding proof of the existence of intelligent life from other planets. More than half believe that the CIA allowed drug dealers from Central America to sell crack cocaine to African Americans in U.S. inner cities. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more when we talk about the racial differences in conspiracy theories, right? Yes?
Did I miss the percentage of what percent believe Christ will
So no, that was a different survey that wasn't up here. So the number of believe Christ will return before 2050, the reason it is before 2050 is it was asked in 2010 by Pew, and the question said, in the next 40 years. And the reason it is structured that way is to separate those people, if you are in Southern Baptist, Church of the Nazarene, faiths that have a strong component of the second coming of Christ, like I was raised in and other ones, there's a large number of that is, will that eventually happen? Of course, but this was to say in my lifetime. Is this an event that I do my life, thinking of my life forward with the expectation that Christ would appear in the next 40 years? So in other words, am I not doing, my estate planning might be a little different, right? So the number is 41%. It was a pre-research of only 1,500 adults, so those numbers are a little more fuzzy, right? 36, this is a 2012 Nat Geo survey. 36% believe that UFOs exist, but 79% believe the government is keeping information about UFOs from the public, right? So you ask someone, and I don't know exactly how these numbers work. Remember, the phrasing of questions can always bring up different things. You try to phrase a question, people read it a different way. But it is not beyond what we have talked about today to think, in the first place, I don't think UFOs exist, but I definitely believe that the federal government is covering up information about it. Because if you ask me the question, is the government covering up? I go, yes. Right? So even if I think it's not exist, they're covering up the non-existence of this, right? 55% believe men in black or other government agents threaten witnesses of UFOs, even though only 36% believe that UFOs exist. Yes?
Do you have any information on the age demographic of the survey?
Because it made me think of, like, my grandparents always pick up the phone and will listen through the entire survey, but my parents are too busy and hang up, and so I wonder, out of these surveys.
You're right. No, I mean, I think I don't know exactly in 2007 how they did it. I know that they tried to adjust for age across the spectrum of the people. That survey, I would feel pretty good about the numbers. The other ones probably less so. So the numbers can be a little fungible. But I'm in that group. If I don't recognize the number that's calling me, my phone might as well not even have a ringer on it. So I understand. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and so I think we always take these with a little bit of salt. If you want to really lean on one of these figures, you'd want to get deeper into the woods. I want them to set kind of parameters of what we think. But you're right, it's a great question. And particularly as you move more and more modern, the degree to which there are not even landlines. So it changes even more. You have a question?
Yeah. I know a lot of times we put it in the dichotomy of we are becoming a more secular people or a more religious people. Is it not possible to say that it's just both? And then it's just we're diverging as a culturally?
Yeah, I think that there's evidence that we're becoming a less churched people, or less traditionally churched people in the sense of denominational attachment. But I don't see there's any lack of, the idea that we're becoming secular in the sense that we're becoming rational Enlightenment figures that Voltaire would have imagined, I don't see that at all. Now, for better or worse, right? So I don't know.
Is that related to the lack of churchiness? Church people, does that relate to, I'm not going to go to my pastor, who's somebody I have a relationship with. I'm going to go to the internet where I have a relationship.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it would not take me much to start me speculating, but I think it would just be that.
I grew up with a priest, and he was a good guy, and he surely believed in angels. I did not. But I trusted him on other things. Sure. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I don't know. And again, I don't know how all of those things would affect all of these beliefs. But my argument, and again, I don't think any of these questions are bad, or I think these are great questions. But there is a sense, what I want to establish is when we want to make conclusions that a conspiracy seems ridiculous, we need to put it in the context of what Americans actually believe. And the boundaries of what they actually believe are much wider and much more for someone who wants to think that we're all about rational discourse, a lot scarier in a sense that what people believe are things in which that the boundaries of belief are far wider than we want to accept. So this is some information. Joseph Osinski and Joseph Parent have done a book called American Conspiracy Theories, where they did questionnaires published in 2014, an extensive survey about conspiracy belief. They also examined 100,000 letters to the editor published between 1890 and 2010 to get a sense of a place where people were publicly talking about different conspiracies. And what they have argued is that there's a conspiratorial dimension in American society, a group of people who believe in conspiracies and think conspiratorially, but are not relegated to one political, racial, or social group. So what they've done is they've sent out trying to get people's responses to this set of questions to begin to classify them. A baseline set of openness to conspiratorial thinking by asking a series of questions that separates those who are inclined to conspiracy belief from those who aren't. Question 1, much of the news we get from mainstream news sources is deliberately slanted to mislead us. 51% strongly agree or agree, 17% strongly disagree or agree. Much of our lives are being controlled by plots hatched in secret places. The occult, them, they lie to us. Even though we live in a democracy, a few people always run things anyway, which had 63% agree or strongly agree. The people who really run the country are not known to the voters. 50% agree or strongly agree. So then they use these answer to these questions and others to break out these people who are higher on the conspiracy dimension and lower on the others. In other words, so they give these, and based on all of these answers being indexed, you come out as either low, medium, or high. And then the question was to look at the demographics of those people to see whether the high group, for example, falls along the lines that we would imagine. Midwestern who's age 28 and is named Phil, and he's on the internet and he lives in his parents' basement, right? How specific can you get on figuring out exactly who these people are? And here's what they found, right? So the measure of conspiratorial dispositions, this is the whole group, right? So to control in secret places is 10% agree, somewhat strongly agree to a few people run things, people who run the country. Agree is the strongest for all of those questions that I presented to you. And then it drops down. So this is just to tell you that of all of them, controlled in secret places is the one that has the most strongest neither strong or disagree, but just that how these things are distributed according to these questions. This isn't getting us yet to the demography, right? Gender, male versus female. Low, about even. Medium, female is slightly higher in medium, and then men are slightly higher in high. So in high, there are a few more men than women. In medium, there's slightly a few more women than men. But by and large, the thing that stands out here is that the gender distribution is almost 50-50. So immediately our thought that this is only a male phenomenon then needs to be revised. As does, and I think your question is even better, then where are the female leaders is a really great question. Where are the women? Because when you look at studies of these communities, they are really focusing on men. And I think that's a missing piece in this puzzle if we accept that the numbers are closer to 50-50, right? Education. So among people with no high school, it is the highest, right? But it's 40%. Among high school graduates, it's almost 40%. College degrees, it's 30%. And postgraduate, it's 25%. Now, depending on whether you think the difference between 40 and 25 is really large or surprisingly small, this number is not overwhelming in the sense that once you get a college degree, it disappears. You're 30% of people in their survey with college degrees or some college are still high on the index of believing these conspiracies, right? So that certainly education has an effect, that the less education, there's a chance of being higher, but not nearly as big as you would imagine, right? And that postgraduate has the most number of people who are low for a variety of reasons. They're socialized into kind of enlightenment thinking and problem solving and use of evidence or whatever. But again, the numbers across the board show that education matters. It is a big effect, but it's not the overwhelming effect in which you'd say, as you go up, this number drops to 5 or 10%. Okay? More of their findings. Very surprising, political ideology, strongly Democrat or strongly very liberal or very conservative, and party affiliation, strong Democrat or strong Republican, does not have a very high effect, right? People with high levels on the conspiracy dimension raise between 24 and 40% on the Democratic side and 27 and 33% on the Republican side. In fact, the highest rates, perhaps unsurprisingly, are among independents, because people who have rejected both parties as being tools of whatever or not effective for a variety of reasons are independent. They have the highest levels. But it is not a sense that it is right-wingers who are only involved in conspiracy thinking according to the way they're studying it. It does change very much who is involved in the conspiracies. That people on the right wing are looking at conservatives, are looking at communists, they're looking at socialists. People on the left wing are looking at corporations, Halliburton, et cetera, et cetera. So the people they're picking for their conspiracies are very different. But the degree to which they're willing to believe in conspiracies, in other words, right wing, left wing, Democrat, Republican, they all have a secret room where they are meeting to do things we don't like. But the membership list and the name cards on the seats in the secret room are completely different, right? George Soros versus Dick Cheney, right? You have very different people depending on which side, right? Those on the index are less likely to vote or give money, which is probably not surprisingly, more likely to be Gen Xers than millennials. that my generation, those born in the late 60s and 70s, are more likely to believe in conspiracies than millennials who were born later. That might change as they get older, who knows. Slightly more inclined to violence. This is a big question as to whether people who believe in conspiracies are more inclined to violence. Slightly. They answered the question, violence is sometimes an acceptable way to show disapproval of the government. 16% of people on the high end said yes, 11% of medium, 6% of low. So if you believe in conspiracies, there is a higher chance of committing violence, or no, maybe not committing, higher level chance of believing violence is a legitimate way to show disfavor to the government, but not in a way that's for me, overwhelmingly different, 16 to 11%, right? So Obama not born in the United States is the red, 9/11 conspiracy in the federal government in the blue, right? This is 2006, maybe it's changed since then. The interesting thing is both conspiracies are believed by wide numbers of Americans, different Americans. That the Democrats, 40+% believe that the 9/11 was a conspiracy in the federal government, much lower among Republicans, and then Obama not born in the United States is surprisingly very low among Democrats and very high among Republicans. So in the sense, what political party does is tell you staff the villains differently and choose which conspiracies you're scared of, but not necessarily whether you'll believe in conspiracies at all. Yeah.
What, if any, role does religion believes in conspiracies? Looking at the questions that we looked at in terms of what Americans said,
yeah.
and so many of them are religious-based. So I'm wondering whether
I am not sure that I have seen, that's a great question. I'm not sure I've seen any of the people who are asking conspiracy theories. I don't have or know the numbers that I've seen that are telling me if I'm Catholic, I'm much more likely to believe in conspiracies. Because these people are not asking religious questions, and the people who are asking the Pew Study on religion are not asking about conspiracies. So I'm bringing these two groups together, but they haven't been indexed in a way that they really need to be, because that's a really great question.
So this is a comment related to the gender thing. I did some Googling, and I found an article on GQ that was like, the 10 sexiest women that you didn't know were conspiracy theorists. And so I went through it, and it's all like, the themes that I saw were aliens, mermaids, astrology, and anti-vaxxers. Not political.
Right.
So that was like, so after you showed like statistics of like, oh, well, there's more likely to be like, it's 50-50. I think maybe considering like what conspiracy theories women are more likely to be involved in than men.
That's a great idea. And then in the sense that I also think vaccination might be one of the center rings of that. That's a really great point. Yeah, so it's not just, again, it might be that gender, not just they're political scientists, right? So they're looking at political breakdown and how that affects conspiracy belief. I think if you looked at gender, what you might find is not less or more, but the particular conspiracies that they are interested in might be different according to their gender. I mean, you want to not be so gender essentialist about it, but you want to check those numbers and look at them. So that's a great point. Thank you for Googling. Which groups are conspiring, right? For Democrats, it's corporations and conservatives. For Republicans, it's liberals and communists, to the degree that those are different things in the minds of some conservatives. Yeah. Hold on. Yeah.
I've gotten slightly confused now about like conspiracy. Does it have to be conducted secretly? And I'm thinking about some like people like myself who believe that the wealthy and powerful work in ways that are obvious, but dishonest. Is that a conspiracy?
I would want to put you on the couch and have you talk me through it, but I'd say no. I mean, right? So I mean, again, this is what we started with before, that conspiracies exist, right? Okay. We know that at Bohemian Grove, or we know at Bilderberg, or at the UN, powerful people meet behind closed doors and talk, and we can look at it and say, well, this seems unfair that the system structurally, economically, they have is rigged against certain people and rewards other people.
But does unfair signal conspiracy? That's, and I'm
no,
for my own thought.
I wouldn't think so. I mean, I think that there's a way in which politics is the dividing up of the goods and services in a particular political group, and they go to some people and don't go to others. I think there's a point where that moves into conspiracy, but I don't think on its face it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Good question. So a political science, they argue the conspiracy theories follow political logic. This is a way for groups falling in the pecking order to revamp themselves, to explain losses, close ranks. This is Trump saying, it's going to get stolen from me. And he is preparing people on the right side to the defeat at the hands of Clinton and setting up that it was a conspiracy that has taken it from him to kind of prepare for how you'll handle a loss, right? So they argue that the big factors are asymmetries in political power, generally linked to who has the White House, and that would be your explanation, right, for 9/11. 9/11 happens with a Republican president, and the perception is this is a Republican conspiracy to have a war in the Middle East. Had Obama or had Gore been sitting in that office, my guess is the read, according to them, would have been completely different, right? That whoever was sitting in the chair, the other team is going to accuse them of something. So this is a way in which, if there's not a foreign threat, the most overwhelming thing is political changes in who has power in domestically, Democrats, who has the White House generally, or Republicans, right? So when Obama goes into office, all of a sudden, left-wing complaints about corporations and the right wing drop, right? When Trump goes into office, concern about George Soros and the power of socialists is going to drop, right? That they engage as political power shifts. Now, I think this is somewhat too simple. I don't think it explains everything. I don't think it handles all of the conspiracies that move beyond political, but it is worth thinking about, particularly because we're at the 9/11 Museum, which is not only, but certainly in a large part, a political conspiracy, okay? Had we been talking about different conspiracies, this information might be less if we're talking about UFOs, for example. Still might be interesting to think the way, the widespread belief in who the conspiracy theorists are. But this is much more a kind of them, political scientists, not surprisingly, looking at political questions, right? Following this theory, the fact that Glenn Beck, do you remember Glenn Beck's show? When I was teaching a conspiracy class, Glenn Beck was must-see TV as you just take clips and bring them into class, right? So in 2008, he gets a show. There's a lot of conspiracy theory, a lot of George Soros and gold and different things, and that for their argument, of course, Obama wins. The field is ripe for a kind of conspiracy theories, particularly aiming at socialists and communists. And then when Republicans take the House in 2010, Beck's popularity goes down. There's less of a need of this. The panic over Obama's victory is lower. So they would argue that the political domestic shifts explain that change, right? There might be other issues as well, right? So this is also the reason why JFK stays so popular. JFK is the perfect conspiracy for politics because depending on where you sit politically, you can always find your bad guys in the room. If you are, right, if you want a foreign threat, it's Soviet or it's Cuban. If you are concerned about the right wing, then they are CIA agents, military corporations, Bell Helicopter in Oliver Stone's movie, right? Or if you're right wing and you're concerned about someone on the left having killed Kennedy, then they're communists, they're pro-Castro, they're literally Soviets, right? So, as well as mobsters in case you want a wild card. So because of the number of attacks that the number of different theories about Kennedy, it spans across the spectrum. I mean, this is from the internet, obviously, which is I tried to issue interest-free money into the system so the American people wouldn't be enslaved by the banking cartel, and the Federal Reserve had me killed. So even if you don't want to do left, right, communist, capitalist, military, contractors, CIA agents, mobsters, if you run through that and you don't like any of those, you can turn to the Fed as the one who really killed Kennedy because he was going to introduce silver-backed money, right? There are racial differences, right? There are many conspiracies that center around the relationship between African Americans and white society. And again, as Nick has brought up, as we talked about, this should not be surprising. Given the history of white supremacy and racial oppression of non-white groups in this country, given the number of things that were done to them purely legally, whether it is Jim Crow segregation or slavery for 400 years, the idea that the American government is working against the interests of African Americans, Latinx, and other people of color is not surprising. The numbers we'll look at in a second, but again, the changes are not necessarily the interest in conspiracies, but what the conspiracies are. The belief that the crack epidemic of the 1990s was a CIA plot coming out of Gary Webb's working in the San Jose Mercury News. The idea that AIDS was invented in a government lab to eliminate the black race. Again, you would like to say the American government would not do that. I would like to believe, I do believe the American government would not do that. But you also have the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. You have a long history of medical experiments and things being done to African American populations in which it makes it very hard to say that is categorically untrue. I think it's untrue. I don't think it makes sense. It seems like a awkward disease to release into for various reasons. It isn't going to be effective, but I also think the fact that I'm actually talking about the logistics of doing it means that I've already lost the moral argument that it's impossible that it could have happened, right? The idea that the levees in New Orleans were purposely destroyed after Hurricane Katrina to flood the 9th Ward, majority African American, and spare majority white sections of the city, right? Now, these ideas are not exclusively held by African Americans, but among African Americans, there are different conspiracies that come out directly of the African American experience, right? Things in which, I mean, arguably, I imagine that people in the gay community could look at AIDS as a kind of a right-wing plan to get rid of homosexuals, right? So it's possible to imagine using some of these pieces to come up with a different conspiracy, but that is not one that necessarily is plaguing middle-class America, right? This is race and conspiratorial predispositions among whites. Low is at 36%, high is about 30%, and medium is about 35%. Among African Americans, it's about 20% for low, so fewer on the low end, many more on the high end, almost 45%, and then in the medium, and then high is about 30%. So the high is not that much different among the races. Again, it's not, and then this is Hispanic down here, non-white Hispanic, right? So in which medium is very high. So more people in the black community are open to these. They rank in the medium or high. But on the high level, it's not exclusively higher for African Americans or what they have as Hispanic or Latinx versus white, right? So here you have, right, Spike Lee, and he's on Bill Maher in 2007. Said it's not far-fetched. A choice had to be made to save one neighborhood, flood another neighborhood. Look. If we're in LA and there's an emergency situation, we call from Beverly Hills or we call from Compton, which one are the cops coming to first? Do you think the 2000 election was fair? If they can rig an election, they can do anything. With the history in this country, you ever heard of the Tuskegee experiments? There are many examples, if we go down the line, where stuff like this happened to African American people. I don't put anything past the American government when it comes to people of color, right? So in this one statement, Spike Lee is moving through a number of things we've discussed tonight as far as saying, as an African-American male who's familiar with the history of the American people and the African-American people with the American government, there are a number of things, right? One, structural racism. We don't get the kind of social services that we get. Two, you have to make a decision to flood one neighborhood, and of course the African-Americans are going to come out on the bad end of that. And the Tuskegee experiments, just to put in there, don't tell me the government wouldn't do this, right? So, and then in the middle, do you think the 2000 election was fair? If they can rig an election, they can do anything. Again, there is this, and you could, if you change the names, dates, people, places, but kept all of this talking about they with a different set of evidence, it could work for people of different races, right? But these are distinct because of the experience of African Americans inside of the United States. Does that make sense? Right?
Does this connect to I just made a quick connection to what we talked about earlier. If 36% believe UFOs exist, but 79% believe the government's keeping information away from about that. So it's kind of like, well, I don't know that I believe in UFOs, but if there is, it wouldn't surprise me that it's being kept a secret.
Sure.
So, isn't that the same kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a kind of there's a long history understandably, among the African American population of all of the things that have been done, and it's impossible to say that it couldn't be done. Yeah, I mean, right. So I agree.
General distrust.
Absolutely. Right, where do we start with? Right, Kyrie, the basketball player in Flat Earth, they lied to us on the back of a kid's jersey, right? Trust no one. Yeah.
So, I guess I find it problematic to compare events where there is evidence, like these, like the Tuskegee experiment,
Sure.
the eugenics movement. I mean, there's lots of examples, right?
Right.
To belief in UFOs. I don't see it as the same.
No, I think that's
thing.
right. I mean, I understand that. What I guess I wanted to say is the argument here in which, and I think that if you want to look at what has been done, and I'm not necessarily saying this is the same as UFO belief, but I am saying that this is conspiratorial belief about politics, and the arguments that he's making is one in which we can't trust the government acts against us, and the number have done these things.
I'm not
Yeah.
saying that you're saying
Oh yeah, sure,
but
yeah.
among the general, society.
Sure.
That this, and again, and because I am a person of color, I will tend to believe
Sure.
these kinds of statements, because like even the eugenics movement, it wasn't just people of color, it was poor people.
Sure.
Right? If you're poor,
Right.
regardless of what color you are in this country, many things have happened where
Absolutely.
where the government has made certain decisions or just absolutely discounted the rights and the humanity of the people being affected. And so
Absolutely, I totally. Well, I guess the difference would be that in our kind of first conversation, which is these things are revealed to have actually occurred, and this kind of goes into like Nick's thing, which is there are things that are done that we know are done that are wrong and evil that aren't conspiracies. So some of these certainly fall into that, but this is also the basis of is AIDS designed in a lab? This same rationale, so the rationale for here is somewhat easier to buy because they're talking about things that actually occurred. Some of those other beliefs, this is going to be the evidence, the proof text for that. In the same way, similar ways, if not as believable, for other conspiracies are going to draw on what the American government has done more generally. Yeah.
What's interesting to me is that and this is from an English teacher, the rhetorical moves, the rhetoric
Sure.
is the same, even though the experience is absolutely different, as you said, and absolutely accurately evidence-based, based on history. But is it fair to say that because the rhetoric is the same, the rhetorical moves, the moves of argument, that these are both conspiracy theories?
Well, I think it's interesting. So, for example, we go to this, right? So, Dark Alliance was 1996. Gary Webb writing about. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, writing in the San Jose Mercury News, wrote a series of articles arguing that during the Iran-Contra plot, CIA agents looked the other way or actually assisted Central American drug cartels linked to right-wing movements. The press attacked him for arguing that the CIA started the crack epidemic. Now, it wasn't exactly what he said. He didn't say necessarily. He wasn't even arguing that the CIA was bringing in the crack and selling it on the streets as much as they were aligned with people who were selling drugs to finance their paramilitary activities, and the CIA looked the other way. Now, so the question is this true or not? I mean, it's hard to imagine saying, well, again, we'd love to say the US government wouldn't do this. I actually think there's a really strong argument that the claims of African American people in particular, Latino people as well, their claims that are legitimate are dismissed as conspiracies because they sound like the other conspiracies, right? So I think that there is a sense in which you can attack Spike Lee or ignore Spike Lee and say flooding the Ninth Ward or medical experiments or Tuskegee. Like at some point in Tuskegee, if that had come out in the late 60s as an accusation, people would have said that's absolutely 100% not true. It can't be true. It's a crazy conspiracy theory, right? So I actually think that one of the other angles is that when Spike Lee sounds like, in many cases, like if you change these words, it sounds like it, then legitimate complaints of African Americans and people of color are rejected as conspiracy theories when, in fact, they will be proved not to have been, right? So how does conspiratorial thinking work? And this is slightly different, getting into the idea of moves and rhetoric, right? Language of symbols. You will see if you read conspiracy stuff or see conspiracies talk, they will show symbols, talk about symbols, the importance of symbols, the obsessions with numbers and dates, right? If you were going to make, and I make my class, my students, make a conspiracy and to see whether they've mastered this kind of language, right? The idea that Roswell and the CIA are both founded in 47. Right? That's going to be one. The fact that the American Revolution and the Illuminati are both in 1776, right? You're going to draw these connections. A belief in long-lived secret conspiracies, often of groups and families. big elements of racism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, Jewish bankers are alive and well. That is a big rhetoric, big background move. Anti-Semitism rears its head, often seen as connections to biblical or other ancient groups. Sometimes it is the Masons, if they count. They claim to be connected to King Solomon, to Bible, to ancient astronauts, to the Templars come up a lot of these ancient groups that are tied into it, or that this is part of a long understood biblical Luciferian plot, right? And often I want to talk about this. It's key to keystone thoughts that are not obvious in the conspiracy itself. We have one more. We have a question. And one of the things I want to say is there are no coincidences. There are no coincidences. This is probably the most powerful thing of thinking about conspiratorial thought. If something happens on a day that is related to another event, it must be connected. It is impossible that the UFOs and the CIA are not connected, right? There are no coincidences, because many of the conspiratorial thinking is, if there are two things, much conspiratorial thinking is simply, did you know that blank and blank? Right? So did you know that 2 and 6? I'm not adding it up. I'm not telling you what it is. I'm just saying, doesn't it seem a little weird that 7 and 4 and 4? Right? So you'll see this again and again. The rationale of saying, I'm putting two things together and I'm not causally linking them, but doesn't it seem strange that this symbol is on both things? Right? So in an American, I also want to say, and this is where we get into some religion, because I was raised in an end times church. It doesn't surprise me, but it is rife in American culture. Remember that Hofstadter was talking about millennialism and apocalyptic views, right? That often conspiracy fears are connected to Christian eschatology. Christian eschatology is the study of the end of the world, right? The rapture, the second coming, the tribulation, all of these kinds of things. That involves numerology and symbols, right? If you read the book of Revelation, which is a key text for this, there are going to be 7 horns and 9 crowns and so many bowls and so many angels and so many witnesses and saints, and there's going to be a dragon and a leopard, right? It's all symbolism. It's all, again, remember the occult idea, the hidden. This is a code to be figured out, to tell you what will happen in the future. And you need to know who the dragon is and who is the whore of Babylon and what is the Antichrist. All of these questions. And if you believe in the kind of what has emerged as a Hal Lindsey end times, right? The Left Behind series becomes a massive, from 1995 to 2007, 16 books, 80 million copies. The first 4 Left Behind books have the 4 slots on the top, on the New York Times bestseller list at the same time. 7 have been number 1, 5 films of differing quality, and 1 PC game, right? But this is popular culture, and the understanding, remember that the underlying argument of this kind of Hal Lindsey, late planet Earth, revelation thought is there will be a world government controlled by the Antichrist, and it will persecute Christians during the tribulation. So when they talk about the UN, or they talk about the ATF, or they talk about the New World Order, and you want to argue particular bits of this, for some people, they're not arguing that evidence because they know there will be a world government. Okay, maybe it's not the UN, maybe it's the EU, maybe it's something else, but you're trying to argue the facts of a particular case, but underneath it is this belief of that we know there will be a world government. You want to argue about whether it's going to be Agenda 21 as part of it or not, but the real argument is, do we believe that the book of Revelation is telling a future story in which there will be a world government shared by the Antichrist, and we are in the world time, so it must be happening soon, right? If you believe Christ will come again in the next 40 years, and if this is the narrative of the future, then we're only waiting for the world to get in line with what we know will occur. And so an argument about Agenda 21 is only a tiny bit of an argument of a giant worldview that is often hidden from view in the conversation that you're having. Right? This is an illuminated reading of the dollar. How did we get an eagle? And so this is the obsession of the 13. It could be the 13 colonies, maybe. Who knows, right? This is the 72 layers of brick are tied into the 72 powers of the name of God and the Kabbalah. We do have the all-seeing eye, the great architect, who on this is listed as Lucifer, But it is strange, right, that on our money, like if you look at other countries' money, there are birds on it, right? There's like Madame Curie or like a poet. And ours has a Masonic symbol of the all-seeing eye, right? And again, it happened. Roosevelt, who was a Mason, talked to Henry Wallace, who was his vice president, about redesigning the money, also a Mason. This is the Great Seal of the United States. So these two things are the either side of the Great Seal of the United States, which never got much play, but was made in the 1770s by a bunch of Masons, and it's now put on the money. But there's an argument that they will argue that this money is a kind of magic spell, that the money looks like this for a reason. If someone is plotting and saying there's a Luciferian Masonic plot, part of the United States, and they feature this, right, then this is the argument of these are the important symbolism, right? So, and this I can't actually believe, right? So you have people who are afraid of the government, right? You have people who are afraid of the government, afraid of plots, afraid of Masonic plots, Luciferian plots. Is everyone familiar with who John Poindexter is? John Poindexter was in the Bush White House and was indicted and convicted in 1991 in the Iran-Contra affair. Found guilty, later pardoned, and he's called back to head the DARPA Information Awareness Office. Do you know what DARPA is? DARPA is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Administration, I think. It is the spookiest of the spooky. It is where the government makes its most advanced pieces of technology. It's a big thing in conspiracies for weather manipulation or chemtrails or all of the other things. If you need a piece of tech that is on the edge of scientific possibility, DARPA is your office. So it's already suspicious. He was head back to the Information Awareness Office. Does anyone remember what the Information Awareness Office was supposed to be? This was the debate in 2002 over whether the NSA would be legally able to collect all of your communications on the internet and all of your phone calls. And the Information Awareness Office was the office that was going to collect all of the electronics communications. There was a huge pushback against it, and this was shelved, though parts of it were put into other things. Okay? So this is a guy convicted in Iran-Contra, comes back, heading the office, is a military head of DARPA, or working with DARPA, on the Information Awareness Office. They have come up with a symbol for this organization where they're saying, we're going to absorb all of your information, we're going to keep it, but trust us, we'll be okay with it, and I'm John Poindexter, you can believe me, I was in Iran-Contra, okay? Does anyone know the symbol they picked for this organization? It is a floating, all-seeing eye with a beam coming onto the planet, absorbing all human knowledge. And then you wonder, like, you got to think, like, you got to be trolling people, right? Right? You put Scientia est potentia, science is power, underneath a picture of a floating Masonic eye with its beam shooting down on, I think, Europe. I mean, right? So these were the Olympic mascots in 2012, right? So you put that on top and you go, like, they say it's a cab light. Do you think anyone concerned about watching the giant space pyramid thinks that's a cab light? Like, you're going to have the Olympics there and you're going to give them one-eyed figures with pyramids on their heads? Right? I mean, so I don't think this is an Illuminati plot. But I mean, you've got to think, like, come on, right? So, right? So what are the appeals of these beliefs, right? One is there really is a deep pleasure in figuring out what's happening, in what's in the know. Like there's a lot of work done on the importance of P.T. Barnum in the 19th century. And part of the appeal of Barnum, the bunkum, the mystery, come and see the Fiji mermaid, was to go there and figure it out. This is why we want to watch a magician, why we want to watch Chris Angle. Part of it is we want the idea of, I'm going to figure out the trick. And this is on a bigger scale. That sense that you have in talking to so many conspiracy theorists on a Delta flight, where they look at you and they say, you're fooled. I'm not fooled. I know what's going on. I understand. I'm not one of the sheep. I've figured it out. I'm above this system. I understand what's really going on. In a world of confusing complexity, I have the key. I've unlocked it. I know what cause and effect is and how it works, right? Because in reading a lot of these conspiracy theorists, there is a real sense of fear that no one is in control, right? The idea that even if there's a conspiracy that's controlling everything, that's malicious, that's evil, that's cruel, at least someone's in control. I could see it in reading the kind of writings of Puritans in the 17th century, and the Calvinist God is a mean at times God, but it's still that sense of being in the hands of someone who's in control. Even if there's an evil conspiracy, at least things aren't just happening random. We aren't just prisoner to one thing bouncing into another, or that 9/11 just happened because it happened that way, right? There has to be somebody behind it. And if somebody's behind it, even if that's not somebody you want to be in charge, the idea that the world is a thing that can be controlled, and it's not random, and someone's behind it, and there's a plot, there's a purpose, there's a reason for this all, even if the reason's awful, is sometimes better for many of these people than the idea that it's just random, right? Because also, if there's someone in control, if the world, the modern world in all of its complexity is something that can be controlled, then we can replace the person in control and put us in charge, or someone good in charge. Someone can be in charge. And so there's something to fight against. If all of these things just simply happen out of random happenstance, then how do we improve? If there is a world that we can control, then we can fight against it. And if we fight against it, we can win, and this thing is a thing that can be controlled, right? Many conspiracy theorists, as you talk to them, overstate their ability to explain things. This is now when you're in conversation with them, such as gravity or light. People want to have universal sets of explanations. It's easier. It's more comprehensive, right? If you say that all of these things are due to a particular single factor, it makes it easier to understand, right? Oftentimes, and you will see this if you are going to engage your students on this, they will give you and quote information that has no basis in fact, but it will be quoted to you in a very strong voice, right? And part of this is American democracy has always had a really uncomfortable experience with experts. There is a strong part of our culture that says, I'm not going to listen to you just because you are some expert or you have a degree, right? There is this kind of, and again, politicians play into this all the time. The elites, the experts want to tell you that you don't know such and such. But we should run our economy, our nation's economy the same way you run a household economy. Well, that makes no sense. But to tell you, a politician who says, you don't need to listen to the experts you know, right? I mean, how many people are like, well, yeah, your cardiologist said that, but my naturologist said I should do this. And you think, well, why should I believe one rather than the other, right? Why should we believe someone simply because they're an expert, right? And this rejection of expertise is also the sense that the evidence that they're bringing to you is inherently tainted, right? You can't trust it because they lie to you. Well, sure, your cardiologist said that, but that's because the AMA has tried to get rid of natural medicine for 100 years. So he's just a pawn in this conspiracy, right? Cultural theorist Peter Knight noted that, quote, conspiracy had become the default assumption in an age which has learned to distrust everything and everyone. I think Tamara was here and said, as a millennial, all of this stuff is literally the language that she speaks. She doesn't even need to talk about it or have language because the images that you see, the memes, simply communicate all of the information because she's so kind of like involved in this culture this way, right? And the actions of government have, as we've talked about throughout the day, have led to more of these. Even the attempts to be transparent have led to the assumption of more conspiracies, right? So one of these things that you see in these conspiracies as you get into them and you engage with them is that they escalate. They find themselves escalating the plot. In 9/11, for example, for a person who says, well, who has to be in on it? Well, there weren't actually planes, those were missiles. Well, what happened to the actual planes with actual passengers? Well, they were taken, okay, so now everyone at this airfield is also involved in what they were just murdered there? I mean, like, so you get these theories as they move out. You have to have more and more people involved in them. To have the moon hoax, right? You have to have all of these people, not only at the time in NASA, but then since, and then all the people in government, and all the people who've covered it up after that, and all of the astronauts, and people who've worked in NASA after that, and all the people that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? all the logistics of hiding planes, of hiding 9/11, faking the moon landing. The flat Earth is huge on this, right? I mean, to hide the fact that the Earth is flat and that we're sending satellites up that aren't going anywhere, but it's all part of a conspiracy to cover it up, oftentimes lead to magical and supernatural, right? You reach a point where the evidence is going to begin to collapse, and what you see underneath that is clearly a religious or magical sense that this can happen because the rules of reality are not the ones by which we're having this discussion, right? And this sense of no coincidences. When someone introduces something and says, well, isn't it weird that this data point is there, right? Isn't it weird, like, and you know, I'm sure no one knows them better than me, that there are data points of the entire 9/11 that, you know, everyone says to go like, yes, that's weird. Like, that's a strange thing that it happened that way. But the conspiracy theorist, there's no room for that, right? This is all a system in which things are being done for particular reasons, and there are no coincidences, right? Again, as we said, 9/11 as an inside job brings up this all the time, which is, why did this happen this way? Why did it occur this way? And engaging with people, the plot often gets bigger and bigger, and the cover-up has to get huger and huger, and more people who have somehow stayed silent have to be part of it as it expands, right? These, as you might imagine, on the internet in particular, these conspiracies can be very unstable communities, right? Passionate communities of people who feel that they are discovering the essential truth about the world. They're drawn together by their sense that they're finding a real truth and that they share this persecution. They want to have an interest to battle the conspiracy. But they are also fragile communities and very explosive, right? Because with an inability to control how evidence works, there's no way to change, and how do you fight battles over where the boundaries of the conspiracy are? So someone has a conspiracy about the CIA doing something, and someone brings in UFOs. And you go, I don't want UFOs in my political conspiracy. Well, then you're part of the conspiracy, because it's all about UFOs, right? So someone brings in an element of some other aspect, right? So you're arguing about you're arguing about CIA, and then they bring in, well, it's because they're working, as David Icke says, with the underground lizard people. And someone goes, okay, look, we don't want underground lizard people in our conspiracy, we want you out. And the thought is, well, by what metric? Right? We've moved past the idea where we're introducing rational evidence and having, like, how do we make these choices? So we're in a community, and I introduce that David Icke's ideas of a reptilian race, or I introduce grays into the conversation, and it can rapidly spin out of control. Now, I want to show you just a little bit about that. This is, oh, look, Nazi flat earthers, aren't you surprised? This was an article on Wonkette that's very snarky, but it illustrates this, in which there is on Stormfront, which is a Nazi page dedicated to the Hoaxacost, the Holocaust not being real, and white supremacy and Aryan nations, there was a strong influx of flat earthers who wanted to address that the flat earth was part of this conversation. And then you watched there's White Liberty, the guy who posting, who says, science is the acquisition of knowledge capable of being reproduced. You can't reproduce Big Bang, it's not science. With flat earth, there are multiple lines of evidence that point in the same direction. Many globe claims have been power of suggestion, reliance on authority. You can't land on a lightning bolt, you can't land on the sun or stars or planets if they are electromagnetic plasma formations. We don't normally deal with plasma or understand its properties, right? So now this would explain why NASA had to lie and fake a moon mission. So now you have flat earth coming into this community of Nazi Aryan nations people, right? So then it goes, this guy writes, why not? They lie about the Holocaust, they lie about the Bible, they lie about the single war, they constantly change history, they pretend to be part of the European diaspora, they lie about the control their banks have, they shovel race-mixing propaganda down our throats. So if any of this flat earth stiff has any merit at all, it wouldn't be a surprise if the Jews were lying about that too. So now you have a conspiracy movement. Now, I don't feel bad for Stormfront, right? So weep not for the Nazis. But the moon landings are fake. I don't think we can even get to the moon. NASA even admitted we can't get past the Van Allen belt due to radiation. So I'm 100% the moon landings were faked. At least the first one. So, I mean, so you think, like, again, this is not meant for probably a deep dive, but you would like to know, so the Van Allen belts mean you can't leave the atmosphere. So we faked the first one, but then maybe not the other ones, right? So again, so you have this, like, so then you have other Nazis come in and argue back and forth about you need to get out of here. So you have these conspiracy movements, and again, the question about the internet, they bloom, they grow, they move, they separate out, and then they go and they fester and they grow again. Now again, I don't mean to use fester overly pejorative. I mean, some of these people are people looking for real evidence who are really concerned that their kid got autism and they're concerned that it's vaccines. Whether you think they're misguided or not, they're not necessarily evil. That is not the place for necessarily Aryan nations. But, right, the difficulty of debate is that when you have a student or you have a person on your Delta flight that you're having this conversation with, it's hard when the two sides regard each other as naive or stupid or worse, corrupt. Like you're part of this system, right? Conspiracy believers often have a considerable amount of evidence that may or may not be true, but they have mastered it and it will come at you in rapid fire fashion. So the difficulty of engaging with evidence that may or may not be true, often referred to as a quantity of evidence over a quality of logic, right? And you're having these conversations with your students, I will venture a guess as because when they are 18 and in my classroom, I am shocked at the amount of information they can master about a conspiracy theory and shoot out with 100% confidence and be unable to tell me anything about the Constitution, right? So they are skilled in particular areas, right? So again, these are often ideas that are closer to identity or religion. So moving forward and just attempting to say, you're dumb, you're wrong, is not necessarily going to generate a dialogue that's going to influence anybody, right? So I've had to find other ways to engage this since I am walking headfirst into this debate. For example, this is the flat earth we've talked about. Behind the flat earth is a religious concept, oftentimes. Now, I don't know that Kyrie Irving is particularly this, which is that the Bible talks about the way that the earth was set up, that it has a firmament, that it has pillars set in, that there is a depth underneath, that's where the Leviathan swims. And so one of the underlying things about flat earth that seems so ridiculous and so like, well, we know there's a flat earth because we have a picture of it, or if the earth was flat, gravity would work in a horribly strange way in which trees on the edge would all point to the center because of where the gravity well would be. We haven't really worked out the math of a flat earth gravity system. But underneath that is about biblical literalism, about the Bible being true, and having a debate over how satellites would work is not nearly as important as the idea that the Bible is true and the Bible tells me this. And the reason this is being covered up is because modern American society hates the Bible and wants to convince people the Bible isn't true with this idea of a round earth, right? So the debate over the flat earth seems like the easiest debate in the world to win, this is literally going to take no time. But underneath it is oftentimes deeper issues of identity and belief that aren't attached to that argument. Yeah, your question? Yeah, that's coming.
Go back to my question about like measuring religious affiliation
Sure.
or beliefs, because I feel like all of these examples in some way connect to some religious component, and so how is this could you study this measuring what someone's religious beliefs are?
Sure.
Because I feel like in every single one of these there's some level of reference to the Bible or to anti-Semitism. In some way there's a religious component.
Right.
So if you take the religion out of it and you look at cultures or societies that are not affiliated in any way with that, how is that
No, I think
portray
it would be a really interesting study that I haven't done to look at, there are certainly societies in Europe, for example, that are much less religious and much less even spiritual in their belief than ours, to look at whether their conspiracies have these same components. I think it's a great idea. No, I agree with you. I think it's a wonderful question.
So I wanted to respond to that, and also because a claim that you made earlier about religious claims being safe from evidentiary arguments, I think that's only really true if you talk about traditional Christianity, because I mean this people like Muslim so why then it's like, well, why does everyone think that Muslims are terrorists when it's like their religion tells them to be like loving and kind and like all of these things, and then everyone's trying to like go back to the Quran and be like, but here it says like there's this one sentence that like talks about killing people, and like there's sentences in the Bible where it talks about that too. So I think when we talk about what religions are safe from evidentiary arguments, I think there's a distinction there.
I guess what I meant was in personal conversation, if someone says that they believe something that's religious, the response tends to be if someone says, I believe JFK was shot by the mob, that is a conversation we can have that seems evidentiary. And if you say, I believe in Jesus as my personal savior, I don't feel the sense that you have opened a conversation about evidence. Now, I will also say that you're right in the sense that people from outside of a religion will look at things inside of a religion to justify their prejudices against that religion. Both, as you said, for Muslim in particular, what is the struggle, right? I mean, so what are we talking about? To what degree can you look at something that advocates violence? And there's things certainly in the Bible that's a very violent book, particularly in the Old Testament, right? So, but I think what I mean about the evidentiary claims is we tend to give socially a free pass to religious claims that we don't hold them up in the same way as factual claims, right? But I think so.
But if someone says like, oh, like I believe in Allah, then it's like, oh my God, so you're gonna like.
Well, I don't know that
everyone.
I don't think everyone reacts that way, but I certainly understand. Yeah.
There's an underlying thing, Drews, if I can just
Sure.
jump in here, that maybe using the term religion can get us hung up, because I think one of the most important things that Steve is talking about here is the notion that we still have an enchanted world, a world that is full of all kinds of powers, visible, invisible. Go back, guys, to my talk on Oklahoma City, right? When I said to you that for many people in Oklahoma City, the bombing ripped away, particularly for conservative evangelicals, the bombing rips away this illusion of secularity. And behind it, there is this teeming world of angels and the presence of angels was everywhere in the culture of the time, right? Angels bringing the children up to heaven. I mentioned to you the newspaper with shimmering insulation and people drawing lines to angels. So this notion, of an enchanted world with all these powers is really, really important. And it's not so hard for us to think about. We don't think all space and all time is the same, right? There are powerful places, sacred times. A good and simple but not simplistic definition of, say, sacred space. Any place that's capable of being defiled or desecrated is by definition sacred. Right? We don't think about a parking lot at a supermarket in the same way we think about Gettysburg or the space here. So I think that's a really, really important part of all of this. And one other just thing I was thinking about, I've heard Steve do this lecture now. It gets better every time, and I keep falling into that trap saying, boy, I'm really glad I can sit back and think rationally and above conspiratorial thinking. And then I think of the conversations that we both have about the Kennedy assassination. And I believe that Oswald acted but didn't act alone. So there we are. But even more, conspiracy theory as a kind of behavioral reflexive tick that we have, maybe as Americans, maybe. Simple example, and I just thought about this today when you're talking, your sports team loses an agonizing game. Well, they probably really didn't lose. The refs lost it. There was a conspiracy because the conference wants X team to win so they can make all the money. I read this all the time on sports blogs, and I do it myself. They shouldn't have lost that game. I bet that ref was secretly, a fan of X. And there I am in that world, right?
I imagine that you somehow stopped yourself from calling out the Ohio Buckeyes.
I guess. Now I won't even ask about connections The fact that I was born in 1947, we'll leave that one.
There are no coincidences. It's in the numbers. All right, so again, as teachers, should we engage, right? Oftentimes it's easier to shut down discussion and just move on, right? At the danger of getting into an extended debate with a student, you are in uncharted territory where you have left the area that you have prepared oftentimes, and you are now in a place in which you have stepped down from the podium to engage the audience one-on-one, right? This is a dangerous place to be. I recognize that. Even with debunking, there's no guarantee that the student is going to be like, you've convinced me, oh my God, I can't believe I was so wrong. I can guarantee you that having literally hundreds of these conversations, that is not going to happen, right? So maybe you run into someone, you do run into some people who are like, well, I saw it on the internet, well, I'm glad that's not true, right? So you do run into that. But that's your top line, you're going to get from these conversations, right? But I think pretending that these conversations are not there, keeping the classroom as a kind of space where these conversations don't happen, we don't have those kinds of conversations here, we don't engage with that, is not setting a bar that they're thinking like, okay, it doesn't rise to that level. They simply hold it unquestioned. And that our classrooms, or at least my classroom, feels further and further removed from the ways they think we're actually discussing how the world works, right? I think it allows bad thinking to win the day, right? So there are a few ways to challenge it. One is Occam's razor, and this undercuts the idea of conspiracy theories to get more and more baroque as they move forward, right? That if you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras, right? So that if you have this theory to explain the facts that involves aliens and lizard people and all these other things, the thought is, do we need those parts of the conspiracy to make the conspiracy event explained, right? Another one is falsibility, and it's sometimes nice to do falsifiability in the beginning of the conversation, which is, what evidence can I give you that can convince you that it's not true? Not that I necessarily have it, right? So I think this question about religion and conspiracies. If I was to say, what kind of evidence would I need to give you that would convince you that this isn't true? And if your answer is, well, if you had a report from such and such, or had a picture from such and such, or you had evidence or data about this, I would find that to be convincing. If the answer is nothing you can give me will ever convince me that this didn't happen, then you are having a religious argument, right? If you're having an argument in which you say, there is no evidence that you can give me, there is nothing that you will give me that will not be immediately impeached because I believe this is inherently true and my faith statement is this is real for me, you are not having an evidentiary-based conversation. And at that point, I think you can stop having it with the recognition that what you're saying is then, you're not making a truth claim. You're making a religious statement. And that's, whether you want to debate that in your classroom is different, but at least it clarifies what your actual conversation are. Because the most frustrating thing is to actually fight about the evidence, realize that you've won the evidentiary war and haven't touched the actual conversation you're having, right? And the other one is who benefits. And this is actually the one I've gotten the most satisfaction from. I think Cliff actually did some of these conversations. This was his conversation with teenagers, was actually asking the same question, which is not to say, I think what you just said is stupid and it's not real. Not that y'all would ever do that. You guys are great teachers. Not that you would ever say, this is untrue and I don't want to talk about this and this is why it's untrue and I'm going to shut this down. But instead, not shutting, and this is can be a dangerous path if you don't know your students, right? Which is not asking for less, but asking for more, right? One of the best statements I found in the classroom is not to confront with derision or even contrary evidence at first, but to answer the question, why? Why would this conspiracy happen, right? What is the goal? What was the conspiracy necessary to reach this goal? Are there other more simpler or effective ways? What would it take to pull this off? What are the risks? Why would it justify the rewards, right? How has it stayed secret? These kinds of questions, not the questions of, I think you're wrong and I'm arguing with your worldview, but talk me through it. I've often said, okay, you can do it for 9/11, you can do it for the flat earth. If the flat earth, you say, wait, so let's just get a sense of how many people have to be in on the earth being flat. And that number, as you might imagine, is mind-bendingly large. Then the answer is why? If the takeaway is because they don't want evidence of God-created world, first of all, arguments of a God-created world are doing really fine in American culture. It's not like they are ignored. Second of all, when would this conspiracy have had to start, which would have been a lot earlier than the turn to secularity, right? You would have had to start this in the 18th, 19th century, in which religion was unquestionably the center of American public life, and the discovery that the earth was flat would have been like, many sources such as the Catholic Church would have been like, hooray. But even the Catholic Church is off this. That, you know, if anyone had a bias in trying to keep the earth flat, it would be the Catholic Church. Because if this is evidence of a God-created world, then they are certainly someone who would want that evidence, right? The 9/11, which is, when you think about it, the 9/11 plot is really complicated. It involves a lot of loose ends and a lot of exposure and a lot of people being involved, in which we're going to take people who don't know how to fly and put them in flight schools, and then we'll teach them how to fly, but it might get out and we'll have to keep them all quiet so they can then fly their planes into this. And what's the payoff? Right? If the payoff is, well, we get war in the Middle East, I mean, I have one word for that. It's Kuwait. Most people can't find Kuwait on a map. And in 1991, we were 100% ready, maybe not 100%. The United States was ready to go to war for the freedom of Kuwait, a country that most of us had never heard of and would never hear about again after that. It is not that hard to get America to go into war, right? I mean, this is George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, bonesman, head of the CIA, head of the oil government, oil corporation. Iraq must withdraw from Kuwait completely, immediately, and without condition. Kuwait's legitimate government must be restored. The security and stability of the Persian Gulf must be assured. Iraq will not be permitted to annex Kuwait. That's not a threat. That's not a boast. That's just the way it's going to be, right? This is an incredibly powerful statement that the United States military will back up a country that people hadn't heard of, and most Americans went along with it. You don't need to have 4 planes hit 4 locations run by people who are largely amateur pilots to get a war in the Middle East. Not only that, there was a bomb, as you well know, there was a bomb that blew up in the World Trade Center in 1993 that could have done a lot more damage. If you want to bring down a tower, you can do it without all of this. Like, you can imagine in this smoke-filled room saying, you know, Bob, I love the plan, but I think there's a lot of moving parts here. You don't need this Rube Goldberg machine if your goal is war in the Middle East, right? What you need to do is influence a handful of senators and representatives. You can have a false flag operation somewhere where there's no exposure, no risk, no extra moving parts. Even if you want something spectacular, if the federal government is conspiring against itself, it could blow up the White House. I mean, there's 1,000 things you could do that would not require this complicated of a plan. So why do it, right? And so part of this is, if the goal is to get something you can reach in some other way without exposure, why take the complicated way, right? And there are some ironies about these secret societies. One is I've labeled these are invented by me. One is the Yankee fan 69 paradox. This is the idea that there has been a, let's say, generations, if not hundreds of years long secret plan that involves the Masons or the Templars, the Masons, UFOs, secret knowledge, the federal government, the Fed, Rothschild's bankers, and it stayed secret until now on the internet. Yankee fan 69 has figured it out. And he's blowing the doors wide open on this plan. So in other words, there's this sense that you have to believe that this thing is so large and so secret that it has stayed secret for so long, but has been discovered by someone doing research on the internet. And part of that is the Riddler principle, which is the belief that this idea of the obsession of signs and symbols, that this conspiracy has kept it secret, and it's managed to keep it secret to do all of its work, but it just can't stop labeling its work. Like, it can't stop putting the eye on the pyramid on money and then on floating pyramids in space, right? The idea that for some reason this conspiracy is so smart and powerful and rich and stayed secret for so long, but it just can't help taunting people like Yankee fan 69 so that he can put the pieces together to explode it, right? And the final one is the irony of power, which is, if you imagine a conspiracy of huge money, powerful people, international scope, the DARPA, the entire intelligence apparatus of the United States behind it, that it has infinite reach, it can keep people quiet, it can make people disappear, it can kill witnesses, it can use UFOs. If it has all this power, why does it need the conspiracy, right? If what you want is war in the Middle East and you have a secret government that stretches back thousands, multiple generations that controls infinite money and infinite power, what you really want is to get a vote in the Senate? Then you don't have, if you have this power and you want to do this thing, why don't you simply do it? Then have a conspiracy to get something that seems pretty easy to get. If you have infinite money, infinite time, you can silence people, you have mind control, and you're working with shape-shifting lizards. You really don't need the conspiracy. Right, so there's this sense in which the power required to keep it secret is enough power to accomplish the thing the conspiracy is supposed to do. So why this complicated middleman, right? Conspiracy thinking leads to greater hatred, alienation of the population. It results in political apathy. The idea that they lied to us as an unquestioned concept, as a reflexive notion that they lied to us, trust no one, is a dangerous thing in a participatory democracy. It is allowed to become not just part of our political culture, but it's a part of our social culture, of our popular culture. The idea of everyone's conspiring against us. And the reality is that people are using in power these kinds of conspiracy theories, one, to manipulate other people. We've talked about plugging into people's conspiracy theories to goad them into particular things, sometimes horrible social policies. They're also guiding decisions that politicians are making who are actually part of these conspiracy theories, whether it's about Planned Parenthood or about Israel, all kinds of different ideas. There are there are these kinds of underground conspiracies that are pushing both politicians and their voters because they largely remain unchallenged, right? The ability or the lack of ability to push evidence, to ask these questions, to get people to expose these conspiracies, see where they lie, what they do, and how they actually function in American life, because they are everywhere and they are powerful. And they are largely unchallenged. And we're the teachers, right? Seeing conspiracies everywhere, seeing everything as a false flag, or some kind of conspiracy or a scheme is a kind of studied blindness, right? It allows you to not see the world around you as it's happening, as we think it's happening, because you have an explanation, right? So every shooting is just one more false flag. Every event that happens is just one more part of a conspiracy, and I'm not going to get fooled into letting the government take my guns. So literally whatever happens is not going to affect my belief because I already have a set of beliefs to explain these behaviors, right? But it's not just that. It's on all of these issues. Having a conspiracy theory that explains them away means that I don't actually have to engage with what is occurring. I can simply engage with the conspiracy that I have already made up, which makes me having to do anything else absolutely unnecessary. And that's a dangerous place for us to be as a group, as a people, as educators. And I think we need to recognize where our fellow Americans are, right? Conspiracies exist. They are real, right? So we've talked about a number of different conspiracies, right? But so do unsubstantiated conspiracy theories. Our students and fellow citizens, they're surrounded by these types of claims at all time, and our decision to see them as unworthy of commentary, if that is our decision, means not engaging with the primary way that they see the world, right? To matter, and this is historians, and I consider you all to be historians, English teachers. All of us are historians, and to not meet the people where they are with actually understanding the kinds of things they believe, the kinds of things that make up their worldview and make that part of our classroom experience as well, I think is turning our back on an important intervention that we can make into the way that our fellow students and citizens actually see the world around them. And I think it's important that we do so. Thank you.